This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Donald Trump needs a weak dollar.
I don't hear too many bullish cases for China in 2025.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Trump took steps on everything from TikTok to the southern border.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Lisa Mateo. No Michael Barr.
No.
Still off.
Yep.
You know, we'll have to see. Three Island tour. Next week. Maybe you'll check in Monday or Tuesday. John Tucker in to help today. We welcome all of you on a Friday. We're trying to piece together the politics of the moment, our international relations, but a real look at the market. A real treat in the 8 o'clock hour. You know I'm death on product stuff. Mark Gurman owns the high ground on product. Ready? Financials. Apple, 20-year return since the last time John Tucker bought an iPhone. 36.3% per year. 36% per year.
Mark Gurman, chief correspondent, Apple and technology with Bloomberg News. He's usually based in Los Angeles time, but we got him in New York this week, so we're going to get him in our studio, so that'll be good. He camps out, I think, at the Apple headquarters in Cupertino, and that's how he gets all the scoops, I think.
Lots going on here. Carol Masters scheduled to be with us. Her entourage says it's 50-50. We'll see if we get her in the 9 o'clock hour. In moments, a very serious, important conversation to get you into the weekend, given our political economic maelstrom. Robert Kaplan, with all of his synthesis of business and finance and experience at the Dallas Fed, will join us as well. We say good morning on your commute across the nation. Good morning in Dallas, DFW, as we await Mr. Kaplan. We say to you on YouTube, our new digital experience, thank you so much. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts out at YouTube. Odd Lot's on fire.
Really?
I mean, they're only working like a 2-hour work week.
No, yeah, exactly.
But Tracy Alloway and Joe Weisenthal just killing it on Odd Lots. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning is brought to you by IBKR. Will the year-over-year change in U.S. PPI exceed 3% in February 2025 at IBKI, Interactive Brokers, IBKR, Forecast Trader? The yes was recently at 39%. What's your take? Trade your prediction, yes or no, at ibkr.com/forecast. Right to it with our Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa Mateo.
And we've got futures, well, mixed this morning, and this is following yesterday's losses on Wall Street. Right now, NASDAQ futures up about 0.1%, 26 points, but we have Dow futures down 0.1%, 76 points. S&P futures, they're a little change, down about a point. We have the 2-year yield at 4.25%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.47%, and that's down 2 basis points. Stocks in Asia rising. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index jumped 4%. We also have a 14% surge in Alibaba, pushing Chinese tech stocks to their highest level since 2022. Wow. Yes, big news there. Yeah. Currencies right now. Want to point out that Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.2%, moving over to the Japanese yen, down 0.4% at 150.27 against the dollar. We have the euro down 0.3% at 104.70 against the dollar. Shares of Nissan rising higher. They're up about 9% in Tokyo. This was a report from the Financial Times. This high-level Japanese group has drawn up plans for Tesla to invest in the car maker in exchange for Nissan's U.S. factories. But now you have this former Tesla board member who was named as part of the group saying, well, he has no involvement in it and isn't aware of any such deal. Tesla shares, they're down about 0.5%. And sticking with cars, Rivian down 3%. It said its EV deliveries this year will fall short of estimates. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate it. He is absolutely unique as a present president, former president, governor, vice chairman, and chairman of the Fed, and that no one in the multiple years I've been covering it synthesized Wall Street, business, and economics like Robert Kaplan. He was at the Dallas Fed with a real sense of the border political economics, the heritage of the Dallas Fed around Robert McTeer and the Georgia School, their research capabilities, and we're thrilled he could join us this morning for an extended conversation. It's been way too long, Robert. Let me cut to the chase. The definitive series, which Jerome Powell speaks of, is the Dallas Trim Mean. You are expert on that with your research staff. Does the Dallas trim mean for Robert Kaplan, does it indicate a vector of disinflation or a new worry back to the time of, say, Wayne Angel and a higher inflation rate?
It probably suggests inflation is a new word, sticky, meaning it's kind of going sideways, and we're not making improvement. And I would guess that if prices edge up a little bit, it's going to be more supply side issues from here than demand side issues.
What I'm looking at, Robert Kaplan, is the ambiguity, the swirl, if you will, of American economics with our politics. Is the sum total of what our listeners and viewers understand on this Friday, is it towards a depressed real GDP because of policy uncertainty?
Yeah, so there are 5 big structural changes going on. That's very unusual. And I'll just tick off. We're restructuring the way we do fiscal spending, and it's going to have some jarring effect, but we're going to have less fiscal spending. If they succeed, that would tend to lower growth. We're going to do a regulatory review in every industry to try to produce more productivity growth. That actually might be helpful. There's going to be an effort to control the workforce. Obviously, no more people coming in across the border, entering the workforce, and we're going to deport. That tends to lower growth unless we have an effort to revitalize legal immigration. And then we're going to try to restructure the energy ecosystem in this country to lower costs. That's probably helpful. And then the last thing is the tariffs. And the tariffs have a price effect, but I would guess these tariffs and the uncertainty with them on margin lower growth. So you got a bunch of cross currents, and I would guess the net of it all is, I would guess, yeah, growth is probably slowing a little bit right now. And the uncertainty, as well as when you cut government spending and you reduce workforce growth, or you reduce the growth of it, you limit GDP growth. The effort is, I don't know if that's that concerning, and that I think the effort of this administration is to try to create more organic, more private sector growth, less government-led growth, so quote-unquote healthier growth. But top-line growth probably is going to be somewhat weaker, I would guess.
So, Robert, given that backdrop and the 5 big structural changes that you just outlined, if I'm the Federal Reserve, do I just sit on the sidelines and kind of let it all play out? Because the market is kind of suggesting that the Fed's not going to do a lot this year.
Yeah, I think the right thing, the Fed is quietly drifting stage left, and that's okay. The center stage is structural changes, executive branch changes away from the Fed. And in a period like this, I think the wisest thing the Fed could do, yes, is be comfortable standing pat, be careful about what they say, because I think commenting too definitively on how these structural changes are going to play out, it's too early to do it. Tariffs is a good example. We don't even know what the tariffs are going to be. And so, yeah, I think the Fed will do less. I think that's fine. And I think Jay Powell's communication on that has been good recently, where he's made clear we're in no hurry, and people should be prepared. Their focus should be more on what's going on at the executive branch. And the second comment I'd make, if there's a rate I'm focused on, I'm much more focused on the 10-year Treasury rate than I am the Fed funds rate.
Interesting. So, Robert, as we sit back here and we think about the economic backdrop here, how do you view the consumer right here? I mean, we've heard about and talked about and noticed in the data this K-shaped economy. How do you think about the consumer?
There's 2 big groups. It's confusing because there's 2 big groups, probably unlike maybe anything I've seen in my career. There's one group that's 65, rough numbers, 65, 70 million workers that make 55 grand a year or less. And they are struggling to make ends meet. They've lost at least 25% purchasing power. They don't tend to own financial assets. That group is spending, but they're watching every dollar. They're going to McDonald's and they're agonizing over even McDonald's trading down. That's 65, 70 million workers and consumers.
Right.
There's another 65 to 70 million consumers, 55 and older, own their home, have a fixed rate mortgage, have financial assets. And this recent period has been pretty good. Yes,
right.
There's inflation, but their financial appreciation, their financial assets has offset it. And because their mortgage is fixed, they're really not that sensitive to higher rates. And they are spending much more aggressively on services and other products. And that's why when you see corporate earnings reports, it's confusing. Which of these two groups are you serving? If you're serving that first group, you're likely seeing a much more challenging business. If you're serving the second group, business looks better to you.
Robert Kaplan with us, of course, the vice chairman of Goldman Sachs, but far more his relationship with the Dallas Fed, all sorts of academics through the year at his Harvard. We're thrilled he's with us, and we say good morning to you on YouTube, in your home, at your office. All of Goldman Sachs tuned in on YouTube.
Oh, I mean,
sure. That's happening right now. Robert Kaplan, I got in the new Foreign Affairs last night. It's a very strong issue, folks, in these tumultuous times. Mariana Mazzucato, who Robert Kaplan is not on the same page with, the esteemed left economist, huge economic history student, Mariana Mazzucato, with a wonderful essay on where we need to go. And Robert Kaplan, I'm sure you don't agree with all that Professor Mazzucato wrote up in the new Foreign Affairs, but the one thing she talked about, you're the most qualified person I know, is the financialization that we've seen in the last 10, 20, even 30 years, even before the great financial crisis. How do you explain the financialization of the American culture and the winners you just described and the millions of losers out there that are a reality?
Well, so I'll put it this way, and you've heard me talk about this before. Listen, I work at a firm now, and we run a business, and I've run other businesses. Human capital is the most important asset you have, and that's true for the United States. It's true for the state of Texas, and so on. And early childhood literacy, secondary education, skills training, digital divide, allowing people to be more productive. That is key to a growing middle class and building the economy. And what we're seeing a little bit in the last number of years is a divergence financially between I just mentioned those two groups, working people that don't take government money, have probably been employed, done everything right their whole career, but they don't have a lot of savings. They may not own their home. And they're reading in the newspaper about another group of people out there who are rising by bounds in terms of their financial wealth and financial assets. And it seems like capitalism isn't quite working for them. And I think education is one of the vehicles to try to address this. But one of the issues with decelerating workforce growth is education tends to be paid for at the state level and city level. If you're a growing city or state, you got the money to spend on getting affordable child care, full day versus half day pre-K, all these critical things. But if you're in a state, which is probably 40 plus states whose populations are flat to down, you may not have the money. And then philanthropy, which I'm actively involved in, can help pick up the slack, but I think we should be focusing more on our human capital and a little less on financial engineering.
And Paul, that's the common ground between Mazzucato and Kaplan. No question about that. The individual education effort.
Robert, I know in your role as vice chairman of Goldman Sachs, you speak to CEOs around the world. What is their view of, I don't know, the ability to take risk, to maybe think about M&A as a growth scenario? Where are they in terms of how they feel about their business and their ability to take risk over the next couple of years?
Okay, so on the positive side, I think the prospect of a more balanced regulatory environment more cost-benefit analysis, more, in their words, more sensible regulation. They're okay with tough regulation, but there has to be a rationale for it. I think they're excited about that. On the other hand, they're dealing with the trade uncertainty, and if you're going to domicile more manufacturing, for example, in the United States, you really need the corridor of Mexico and Canada for integrated supply chains and logistics. And when they see threat of tariffs on, for example, Mexico, which they hope doesn't happen, which could undermine logistics and supply chains, it gives them pause and makes them want to just slow down a little bit and be more careful. And the other big thing is AI and technology. Now, we've had technology innovation for years, but if you're a CEO right now, you've got to spend on AI in your business. You're not sure which use cases will work and which won't, but you got to do it. And so I think you're going to see, though, a lot of merger activity by companies who feel that, boy, if we're going to take share in the years ahead, if we're going to grow in the years ahead, we're more likely to have to take share. And we're going to have to, size and scale and the ability to afford AI investment is more important than it's ever. And I think you're going to see a desire for many companies bigger to try to deal with that.
I got to squeeze this in, too important. There seems to be another threat, happens every 2, 3, 5 years. It's not specific to Mr. Trump, on Fed independence. How does the institution of the Fed, Mr. Kaplan, protect itself and stay independent versus the McChesney-Martin challenges decades ago?
Yeah, so the thing that's always challenging at the Fed, and this isn't new, is regulatory supervisory policy at the Fed is not politically independent and has not been politically independent. The tilt of it changes, whether it's Obama to Trump, then back to Biden, now back to Trump, and that you'll see. On setting the Fed funds rate, though, and the stance of monetary policy, I think it's critical to this country that stay politically independent. Now, the president can jawbone and pressure, and that's not new. It may be more intense right now, and the Fed will do its job and should to try to the extent they can ignore that, make decisions. The biggest threat to the Fed, I actually think sometimes, is not from outside. Then you have to be careful as a governor or a president. Don't try to say things publicly you think might go over better or worry about the pressure. Just do what you think is right. And as long as they manage themselves, I think they'll get through this in an independent way.
Out of time. Robert Kaplan, next time you're on, we're doing a complete hour on Do We Need the Dots? Robert Kaplan of the Dallas Fed, always and forever, and now vice chairman at his Goldman Sachs. Right to it, red and green on the screen on a Friday. Our news in New York City is John Tucker.
And guys, President Trump continues to make rapid moves to reshape the federal government. According to the Washington Post, the president planning an executive order this week to fire the board at the U.S. Postal Service and fold the agency into the Commerce Department. New poll numbers out on the Trump presidency. A Washington Post Ipsos poll has Trump's approval rating at 45%, with 53% of Americans disapproving. 57% say the president has exceeded his authority since taking office. Well, the Senate has narrowly confirmed Kash Patel to lead the FBI.
The yeas are 51. The nays are 49. The confirmation is confirmed.
Senator Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska were the two Republicans to vote no in a split that otherwise fell along party lines. Patel has vowed to steer the FBI toward its traditional crime-fighting role. Critics are concerned he's going to use the role to seek political retribution. And on his 83rd birthday, GOP Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, the former majority leader, confirming he will not seek re-election.
Representing our Commonwealth has been the honor of a lifetime.
McConnell, who was the longest-serving Senate party leader in American history when he relinquished his leadership post at the beginning of the year, his traditional brand of conservatism was overtaken by Donald Trump's populism. Elon Musk recommending taking the International Space Station out of orbit. He wants to get it within 2 years instead of the current 5-year target. Musk argues on social media the ISS has served its purpose and that there is very little incremental utility with the space station. Oh, and South Africa winning the toss. They're electing to bat against Afghanistan in the opening Group B game of the Champions Trophy on Friday. That would be today.
Did Francis Lacroix put you up to this?
We are talking about cricket. It's kind of controversial because a lot of people didn't want Afghanistan to take part because of the Taliban ban on women in sports.
When I started doing this, I was on radio, and I'm getting emails from Perth, Australia when I mentioned cricket. So John Riding at the time is at Bear Stearns, and he's trying to teach me cricket.
Oh, boy.
I didn't figure it out then. I didn't figure it out now. John Tucker, thank you so much. Greg Vellier, what we're hearing on Capitol Hill, this is printed within the hour. The short answer, what we're hearing in public isn't what we're hearing in private.
Okay.
Does that sum up the moment right now?
Exactly. So we'll pay attention to what's happening there.
It will be an eventful weekend. Our team in Washington, Laura Davidson, Anne-Marie Horton, and others working overtime. From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, Wall Street kind of in waiting mode for any radical moves from President Trump. There are reports he may force some of the U.S.'s foreign creditors to swap their treasuries into ultra long-term bonds to kind of ease America's debt burden. Right now, we'll go to NASDAQ futures up about 0.2%, 65 points. Dow futures down 0.2%, 118 points. And S&P futures, they are little changed. We go to the 2-year yield, 4.25%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.48%. That's down 2 basis points. Over to commodities. Want to point out COMEX gold, $2,947 an ounce. We go to oil. Brent crude, $75 a barrel. WTI crude, $71 a barrel. And the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.2%. Few companies making news this morning. Citi, Morgan Stanley, HSBC, RBC. They're paying more than $126 million in fines. It's to settle antitrust cases for collusion by their traders who shared information about buying and selling gilts between 2009 and 2013. And sources telling the Wall Street Journal the Justice Department launching an investigation into United Health Group's Medicare billing practices. That news has United Health shares down about 7%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it. I get notes from guests. Hey, stupid. That's usually how they start. And I got a love note from Amanda Lynham of BlackRock. She goes, hey, stupid, you're not talking about empty skyscrapers anymore. Joining us now on commercial real estate, because I'm in the Lynham timeout chair, because I haven't done enough on commercial real estate, Amanda Lynham with BlackRock. Is the crisis over? I mean, honestly, I'm confused.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for having me. I would highlight 2 things. One is commercial real estate, as we've argued, can't be painted with a broad brush. In areas like industrial, multifamily, self-storage, actually prices have been increasing.
Multifamily rents are there.
Multifamily rents are there. Industrial, kind of the onshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring, right? So keeping those aside, they were never under the pressure that office was. Within office, you see an extreme amount of bifurcation, no different than the bifurcation you were talking about among the consumer earlier.
Mm-hmm.
You see it in corporate credit. I think we're getting close to reaching a trough, but what is important is that there's still a fair amount of embedded loss in these older Class B, Class C office properties that need to work their way through the system. The banks appear to be reserved for it, but we are expecting, as transactions pick up, as that clearing level in prices is established, we are expecting more, I would say, recalibration in prices as that happens. But we're seeing, I think, a really interesting regime shift in commercial real estate. And it's that investors are now underwriting these properties based on income and rent, not asset appreciation based on lower interest rates. And I think that's a bit of a regime shift over the past few years. It actually mirrors what we see in corporate credit, where investors are buying for yield, not for the total return boost of tighter spreads or lower rates. And actually, you could argue it's happening in equities, where investors seem to be buying equities based on earnings expectations, not multiple expansion. So I feel like this is a really interesting regime shift.
Did she just traipse over to the equity shop of BlackRock?
She can do it all.
I think compliance just fell off the chair.
She can do it all. 30-year fixed mortgage, 6.93%. It seems like this is kind of the new normal, 6-ish% kind of mortgage rates. Has the commercial real estate market kind of come to grips with this is the new level of interest rates, and you got to do all your deals based upon this assumption?
I think that's exactly right. I think there's an increased acceptance of a structurally higher interest rate environment. You see it in corporate credit. You see it even in strategic M&A on the corporate side, where strategic M&A has actually been increasing over the past few quarters as CFOs and treasurers kind of come to terms with this. I think that's part of the reason why we haven't seen a strong uptick so far this year, is because it actually wasn't that depressed to begin with. On sponsor-related M&A, so where financing is more of an input into the economics, it's been a bit slower to rebound. But on CRE, I think there is an expectation that these higher rates are here to stay, and which again is why investors are approaching underwriting, really looking at the fundamentals of the property as opposed to a bet on asset appreciation based on lower rates or lower cap rates.
I'm kind of surprised we haven't seen more stories of banks taking big write-offs on commercial real estate. Is that because office really, at the end of the day, is not that big a part of their portfolios?
So I think there's two reasons for that. One is the banks have been doing a fair amount of loan modifications and extensions, and so they've been giving these borrowers additional time, potentially as a bridge to see through a more favorable macro environment. That's part of the reason, to Tom's earlier question, why we think we probably haven't seen the full extent of this distress cycle, because there has been a fair amount of extensions. For example, we know that there was about $400 billion, using data from RCA, of debt that was supposed to mature in 2023 and the first half of 2024 that did not. So it was presumably pushed into the future years. Right. That's adding to what's already a formidable maturity wall in 2025. So I do think that there's been a little bit of delay. The other point I would say is that Chair Powell even said this recently in his congressional testimony. There are a fair amount of embedded losses that banks will need to take. Again, banks have been reserving for this, so it's just the accounting of taking those charge-offs. But I think there's still a bit more to come. But that's the older properties.
Amanda Lynham with us with BlackRock here on, I guess, macro view on credit, but it's far, far more than that with their experience, particularly on March Madness and Villanova. I mean, it's sort of like, it's like 50-50.
A little problem there.
A little problem there right now. Amanda, a really serious question. I'm looking at the Friday notes, which are basically setting up the weekend notes to get to the Sunday talk shows. Margaret Brennan will be with us with Face the Nation here in an hour or so. If we get the government gloom, shutdown, delay, debt ceiling, all this stuff that nobody cares about except there it is in the Friday notes, what does it do to your world? What does it do to our credit world if the government actually stumbles in the middle of March?
So two impacts, and we saw it in the fall of 2023 where credit did respond. There was a rebuild of risk premium and credit, so wider spreads on the back of that volatility. And then I think at the more micro level, there's an impact on certain sectors that are reliant upon government funding. So areas of healthcare, areas of education, I would say non-defense discretionary spending, right? There's a lot of focus, just like when there was on previous episodes of the debt ceiling, credit does respond to it, for sure.
I'm talking to a guy named Larry Fink. I mean, he doesn't want all this Amanda Lynham chat. Is it basically yield up, price down?
Well, I think in that scenario, when you have perhaps maybe a backup in Treasury yields because of concerns around the budget deficit, debt ceiling, that tends to be not a great driver of credit performance. So for example, when we have higher rates because growth is above trend and growth is outpacing expectations, that's a backdrop that credit can digest. When you have higher rates that are selling off in a disorderly way or in a large degree at a time, that tends to result in wider spreads, and credit can't really digest that as well. And so that for sure is something that we have to monitor very closely. I will say, however, given all of that, what 2024 showed us is that there was a real opportunity risk for being too defensive in corporate credit. Yeah. So what we're trying to do is build portfolios that can withstand a wide degree of both growth and inflation scenarios. So for example, floating rate assets where you wouldn't be hit by that kind of duration hit from a wider or sell-off in treasury yields. Real assets which have inflation pass-throughs, those are all things that we like incorporating in this environment.
Where do you see the best value here? I mean, are you going out on the credit risk picture on the paradigm out there?
Yeah, we actually like moving down in quality. Actually, we put out a node that showed that despite all of the uncertainty that you've referenced so far, high yield has actually held in really well relative to IG. The other interesting thing so far this year, Europe has held in well relative to US. You would not have expected that given the trade uncertainty. A few things. I think one is that the technicals in the European credit market are actually quite robust. So the ECB still owns a big chunk of the universe. It skews higher quality in ratings and high yield. It's smaller. So there are some real anchors. But I think investors somewhat are, and somewhat surprising to us, are looking through a lot of the trade uncertainty, and actually European credit has held in better than we expected. I think it's an open question whether that can be sustained as time goes on. But actually in US, for example, we are comfortable moving down in quality.
Paul came in. He's got Fodor's China. Like Paul's picking the bottom on China. We've heard that this week, right?
Sure.
Is fixed income play on China? Is there a way? If Jeff DeGraff over at Renmac is right, it's a China bottom and things are finally. I saw President Xi's talking to private tech people like Alibaba. Jack Ma.
Sure.
Is there a way to play that?
So I think our emerging markets colleagues, I'm sure, have a more nuanced view. I think for corporate credit in the U.S. and Europe, it was certainly a strong input for global growth. And so a China strong global growth story is positive, especially for Europe as well. And I think that would just further embolden the case that spreads can stay in this tight range for a bit longer.
Alibaba stock up 60% year to date, up 80%.
6-0?
Up 80% over the trailing 12 months. Still well below the peak back in 2020 before the
some good charts on this weekend already percolating out on a Friday. It's always too short. Amanda Lynham, thank you so much. It's just great to have you here. And of course,
BlackRock's pretty big, right?
Huh?
I think BlackRock's pretty big, aren't they?
Yeah, they're ginormous.
Okay,
I mean,
they're getting there.
Like Abby Johnson up at Fidelity's taking a victory lap today. When did the BlackRock people get a victory lap? They brought in, we got through this interview with Amanda without talking about BitDog.
Exactly.
It's amazing. It's a miracle, I say.
It is. Hey, it's higher again today.
Did you talk to McGlone as he deigned us? Did you talk to his people?
We talked to him yesterday. He's just gold higher. I mean, again, the McGlone commodity call for 7 or 8 years has been buy gold, sell everything else.
$29.49, taking a breather, down $7 on the close future on gold. Red and green in the screen. The VIX, a non-story this week, 15.43. From New York City on YouTube, across the nation on your commute, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, it looks like we got red and green on the screen this last trading day of the week. Right now, NASDAQ futures down up 0.2%, 66 points. Dow futures, though, down 0.3%, 174 points. S&P futures, little changed, up about 3. We have the 2-year yield at 4.26%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.49%, and that's down 1 basis point. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.2%. Shares of digital payments firm Block, software firm Akamai Technologies, they're slipping after issuing weak guidance. We have Block down about 9%, Akamai down about 10%. Then you have Booking Holdings. You know, that's the parent for travel brands like Kayak, Priceline. They delivered better than expected fourth quarter results, a busy holiday season, but shares this morning down nearly 2%. And what is riding higher, that shares of Celsius, they're getting a nice jolt up 32%. It's acquiring rival energy drink brand Alanine New for $1.8 billion in cash and stock. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Paul Sweeney to the rescue, noticing Christopher Weaver and Anna Wald Matthews.
Yep.
Over at the Journal, oops, down 10% for a Dow component.
Yeah, the Wall Street Journal reporting that the Justice Department has launched an investigation into United Health Group's Medicare billing practices in recent months. People familiar with the matter say, and hitting that stock, the Dow futures down 178 points. On the back of some of that United Healthcare weakness. But to me, healthcare billing is like AP level calculus. I have no idea when I get my bill what's what.
I've had a sheltered childhood on this. The sentence here, the company's practices for recording diagnoses that trigger extra payments.
Yeah.
And what I hear from people that have real illness that I've been fortunate to avoid in their family, it ain't funny.
No, it's not. And healthcare obviously is a huge issue and the costs associated with it. So we'll keep on top of that.
Paragraph 8, lots of decline to comment on that. We'll continue to watch that with UNH down 10% right now. As Lisa mentioned, the Dow negative 180 futures points. Right now on oil, it has been too long, and she is definitive on Saudi Inc., as we had the joy and the honor of speaking with Edward Morse a few days ago.
Right.
Now an honor to speak with Ellen Wald. Ellen, what does the Saudi royalty want besides $100 barrel oil? What's their desire, given the new hydrocarbon politics of Washington?
You know, it's interesting right now. It seems like they really want to broker peace between Russia, Ukraine, and the U.S. or Europe. They're really pushing themselves as these, kind of neutral peace brokers. Of course, it isn't all so altruistic here, because with an end to Russia-Ukraine hostilities could come some very interesting developments for the oil market, and you can be sure that the Saudis are all about that.
Ellen, just give us, with some hindsight here, 3 years into this war, where, and the sanctions associated with that, where does the Russian oil, where has it gone? How does it get into the marketplace these days?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because it used to go all over the place, and it still goes. It just really mostly goes to two places now. It goes to China and it goes to India. India is just opened this massive, huge market for Russian crude oil, and what's so fascinating about it is their refineries have been benefiting immensely from cheap Russian crude. They buy a lot of it, and they process it, and they make a lot of diesel, and then they go ahead and they sell it to Europe. And Europe is more than happy to buy this, I kind of like to call it laundered Russian crude, because they know where it comes from. They know that it's Russian crude, but as long as, the origin of the diesel that they're using says India and not Russia, they're more than happy to buy it and keep their supplies up and from this cheap Russian oil.
I took out a chart on the Bloomberg today, Ellen Wald. It's an inflation-adjusted Saudi light. And essentially, on an inflation basis, as a generalization, the price of a barrel of oil is where it was 40 years ago. Do we overplay in the media? Do we overplay in our own minds, all of us, the listeners and viewers, the importance of oil? Has it become inconsequential to the public because of its cheapness?
So that's a really good good question. I think that we do overplay the importance of oil in some respects. I know we overplay it when we look at, say, the Saudi budget. So, every year the IMF comes out with these stats and say, oh, the Saudis need X price of barrel of oil to cover their budget. And the fact is that is a meaningless statement because that's not how it works in Saudi Arabia. Aramco sells oil and then Aramco, makes money, and then the Saudi government gets, they get royalties, they get rents, they get dividends now. They get, it's not just that they don't just get the money from the barrel. There's a lot more that goes into it. And so things are a lot more complicated now. Of course, if you look even farther back than 40 years ago, when oil was like two something a barrel, and you realize that what OPEC was fighting for in the 1970s was like to increase it to a price of like $6 something, and that was considered obscene. The request was considered absolutely obscene. And we think about that now, and it seems rather ridiculous. But when you do consider inflation and you do consider what we're using oil now, I mean, look, natural gas is becoming more expensive, such that we're seeing a lot of switching over to gas oil. From natural gas right now, which is not good for the environment to begin with. But it's, so oil is still very, very much a very important, and I would probably say maybe the key role in terms of the hydrocarbon spectrum today.
Right. I got 10 seconds. When do we get a new book? That's all anybody wants to know, Ellen.
Oh, that's a good question. Not anytime soon. I'm thinking maybe I should write a TV script, considering how successful Landman is.
Landman, there you go.
Would you like to weigh in on this? John Tucker can wait.
Well, I know everything about the oil and gas. I'm an expert.
What would Ellen Wald bring to Landman? Oh, wise one.
Well, I'll tell you what, getting oil out of the ground, that is serious business. That's not an easy job. Those people work hard. That's my takeaway.
Deal with idiots like Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene? The closest I've been is a gas station.
Exactly.
It was 44 cents a gallon, and I worked at a gas station. So it's not easy.
I'm ready to be a senior fellow of the Atlantic Council now. That's how smart I am.
Paul Sweeney, oil expert. Ellen Wald, thank you, senior fellow at Atlantic Council, the author of Saudi Light. He is an expert on the price of a gallon at the Wawa with our news in New York City. John Tucker.
Yeah, about $3 a gallon, I'd say. Let's start with this. Israel's military says Hamas has violated the Gaza ceasefire deal by handing over an anonymous body instead of one of the hostages. The IDF says the remains they were given were not those of Shuri Bibas, who was captured alongside her 2 little boys in the October 7th attacks. Here's Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking through an interpreter.
We will work with determination to bring Shiri home together with all our hostages, both living and dead, and ensure that Hamas pays the full price for this cruel and malicious violation of the agreement.
Hamas is set to free 6 living hostages tomorrow. President Trump telling Republican governors they'll do better in the midterms if they embrace his agenda. The president addressing the Republican Governors Association in Washington last night.
My administration will be fighting to help your state succeed and prosper, and together we're going to bring back the American dream, something nobody talks about anymore.
Well, the president's poll with governors that'll face its first test in races in Virginia and New Jersey later this year. 70 million Americans from Texas to the East Coast bracing for possibly life-threatening, dangerous cold. Teens in 20s expected all the way down to the deep south. Possible record lows, maybe 21 in Dallas and 17 in Birmingham, Alabama. Well, if the polling is right, Germany's election on Sunday likely to make Friedrich Merz the chancellor. The critical question, though, is whether Merz can form a two-party coalition. Even before the rupture in U.S.-European relations, it's bound to be the most consequential election in years. And I should say, we'll have an election special on Bloomberg Sunday from 12 noon to 2 o'clock Eastern. Francine Lacroix will anchor, along with Oliver Crook and Kriti Gupta with their reporting.
And John Tucker in New York.
No. No. I'll be watching basketball Sunday and the German elections. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg, closely following Fairleigh Dickinson's basketball
March
team
Madness
as well.
at Fairleigh Dickinson?
Well, I mean, things are heating up. It's not March. I checked the calendar. It's not March yet.
Okay. John Tucker, thank you so much. Paul Sweeney, Mark Gurman coming up.
Yep.
The last 10 years, Apple share buybacks, Barron's has a number, $687 billion.
It's extraordinary. I mean, just extraordinary. You think about
Two-thirds of $1 trillion.
Two-thirds of $1 trillion.
Share buyback.
$100 billion of free cash flow forecasted for this year. It's just amazing.
It's like Intel, except they're making money. Intel didn't up 35% of their stock they've bought back.
I mean, they have a net income margin of 27%.
On product, Mark Gurman at the top of the hour. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Now a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines on Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, and Lisa Mateo.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning on your commute across the nation. Good morning, 92.9 FM, Boston, all sleep deprived.
Yeah.
After the hockey
game. A huge hockey game. Canada, U.S. A lot of folks were really
I
into
asked
it,
around here,
which is
people
good.
said Canada. I have to admit, I looked at it briefly, and I said Canada.
They looked a little faster on the ice. Okay.
They had legs.
Yep.
They had a density to their play that was different than
I think this thing, I don't know. I'm not really a hockey fan, but it got some good buzz, I thought, over the last week or so.
Yeah,
I'm sure the NHL's happy with it.
It was great. I mean, a wicked close game, to say the least, which is a good thing. Bloomberg Surveillance on our front pages, the Lisa Mateo moment, brought to you by IBKR. Will the average U.S. temperature in February 2025, will it exceed 36 degrees Fahrenheit? An IBKR forecast trader, the yes was recently at 44%. What's your take? Trade your prediction, yes or no, at ibkr.com/forecast. Lisa, what do you got?
Okay, we all know Ferrari, right? Hot brand. But the Wall Street Journal has this really interesting look into the crazy economics behind why it's dominating the luxury car market. So it's worth about $90 billion, but it only delivered about 13,700 vehicles, just over that. So they call it this business model based on scarcity, because sometimes they only offer like a few select vehicles to collectors, and the collectors love it because they're part of this elite club. And then while most cars lose value, some of these like select Ferraris, they keep their value, they gain value. Like the hypercar in 2013, it was like $1.4 million. It now fetches about $3.8 million. And they show it's similar to like the Hermes, the Birkin bags. Everyone wants a Birkin bags, and they say it's the same.
Aware of that.
They say it's a similar kind of thing. It has this thing that everybody just wants them, and that's what it is.
So here you go, Tom. I've got something picked out for you. The 2025 Ferrari F80 list price, $3.74 million.
Yeah, but you got
Production
to be Sir Lewis's height to get into things.
Yes,
or Lisa's height.
That's why they don't have to
How
sell
does
them
Matt
anymore.
Miller get into the Ferrari and the Lamborghinis? I don't know how Matt
I
Miller
went
does
over to
it.
the Aston Martin store in Park Avenue once. They threw me out of the store.
Yeah,
Like,
not fitting.
We don't do
do.
it.
Nice try.
Next.
Okay, this one, you pointed this out to me, Tom, so about how restaurants, some are charging like deposits or minimum amounts when you have to make a reservation.
Don't get me going.
Well, I found a story. Actually, London is starting to do this because higher number of cancellations, no-shows. They're also saying it's because of those bots and resale websites that are taking up a lot of the reservations. Yeah. Then they have these social media influencers who want the free meal in order to post a picture. So they're saying that they're charging like $100 like per person as a minimum, and you have to pay it when you book the reservation.
Reservation squatting.
Squatting, that's another thing, yes. when you like multiple bookings and you only go to one.
Wonderful restaurant just off Madison, Amaranth. Good morning to Amaranth. We were talking to Libby Cantrell about the new Van Cleef store. And they said over at Amaranth, great food, great lunch, blah, blah, blah. And Amaranth told me it's the plague. And they're battling what to do about
Let's go back to the old days where you called up the restaurant.
Right.
Yeah,
you said,
exactly.
I'd like a reservation, 2 people.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to wait in line, actually. You can't even call anymore.
Let's squeeze in one more story.
Yes, one more. Okay, big sports media news. Major League Baseball, Walt Disney's ESPN, they're ending the broadcast relationship at the end of 2025. So we talked about it. The league says it's a mutual agreement. ESPN kind of scaled back their baseball coverage because they wanted to pay less.
They're embarrassed
They
by
did.
it.
So there's a lot of ways to watch baseball, though.
Quickly, Paul, where's it going to end up? We're not going to watch the Red Sox.
ESPN is looking at its costs and saying, hey, baseball is a regional sport, not a national sport. We're a national network, so the costs aren't worth it for us right now. So like everything else, Tom, it's going to streaming.
Amazon, Netflix, whatever.
Yep. And,
I mean, they spent over $1 billion on James Bond. What are they going to spend on the Boston Red Sox?
Anything they want. They can afford anything they want, Tom. So, so it's going to the regional streaming services.
Wait a minute, Ari, why are we showing Yankee footage on YouTube?
Yes, there you go.
What else would you show?
Exactly. What else would you show?
You want to go work for Mark Gurman, Ari? That's just too much. I mean, you don't want it.
Thank you, Ari.
That's the last Yankee imagery we do. Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. The newspapers. I will put it out on Twitter and LinkedIn. There are spectacular new videos of the Beatles and some of the ancient hits. I'll be back. John Lennon's classic.
Things to do than to break my heart again. This time I will try to show that I'm not trying to pretend.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
What's the immediate take of a tariff war?
For the longest time, technology has been the driver of this market.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Trump declared a national emergency at the U.S. border with Mexico.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr on assignment. He's got his Apple iPhone on assignment. It's a 3-island tour in the Caribbean, but there's no Wi-Fi.
Okay. Well, yeah.
So I don't know, Gurman's going to solve that with iPhone 20 or something like that. Lisa Mateo with us as well. We're going to get right to it. Folks, without question, the interview of the day, and with the retail ownership of Apple Computer, I'm going to suggest this is your conversation of the year. Mark Gurman, chief correspondent, Apple and Tech. He's here without a turtleneck.
I know.
That's a start right now. Mark Gurman will join us here in a moment. Right to it from the Interactive Broker Studios of Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we've got futures mix. This is following yesterday's losses on Wall Street. NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, 77 points. We have Dow futures down 0.4%, 203 points. S&P futures are a little changed, up about 3. Stocks in Asia rising. We have Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index jump 4%. And a 14% surge. Alibaba pushing Chinese tech stocks their highest level since 2022. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.2%. Want to point out shares of Nissan. They're higher, up about 9% in Tokyo. The reason why? A report from the Financial Times that a high-level Japanese group has drawn up plans for Tesla to invest in the car maker. But now the former Tesla board member who was named a part of that group, well, he says he has no involvement in it, and he's not aware of any such deal. We have Tesla shares this morning. They are up about 0.2%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. Good morning on your commute. Good morning to Ann Arbor, those that were at the Arc last night. Out of the University of Michigan, he has crafted out the most important job in tech journalism. Lucas Shaw, sort of close. Lucas is sort of
that LA bureau.
They're on fire. Mark Gurman joins us in studio here in New York on his ownership of the Apple story. Mark, where I am on this, going back to I was one of the first people to see Lisa and the failure of Lisa and a lot of the early Mac stuff, is to me always and forever what the media misses, and you don't miss it, is chips. I don't want to hear about Tim Cook. I don't want to hear about stupid videos launching stuff. I'm gonna butcher the name. Who is Johnny Shruji, who's going to give us the A18, A19 chip this fall in the new Apple iPhone?
Well, first of all, Tom, you did not butcher the name. That is right.
I came close?
No, you got it right. It's Johnny Shruji.
Okay.
Nice.
You were spot on, as always.
Once a year.
Shruji is probably the most important executive at Apple, other than Tim Cook, who I don't want to talk about.
Why?
At this point, with so much commoditization in the technology industry, Apple's unique differentiator that makes their products better than the rest is their chips.
Thank you.
It allows them to differentiate the designs. They can have thinner form factors, better power efficiency, unique components that all enable new features. For instance, the artificial intelligence capabilities that everyone is talking about today, that support started to be built into their chips in 2017.
Right. Okay, I know you're not on speaking terms with, say, an Uber bull like Dan Ives, but if you had a cup of coffee with Dan Ives at Wedbush, and with your journalistic abilities, is there a constraint or a limit to it on a mathematical basis? Is Johnny Shruji and the rest, are they going to get to a limit where they can't get better and the stock levels or goes down?
Well, I think in terms of performance, you've seen drops. There was a time 10, 11 years ago where you were getting 100%, 75%, 50%, even 25% year-over-year performance gains.
Agreed.
That's not the case anymore. At most, you're getting 10 to 15% performance gains, and that's due to a combination of the engineering at Apple, but also their secret sauce, which is their deep partnership with TSMC, which year after year is able to improve their both production capacity and their production technology.
Okay, my book of the year was Chip War. It's a fabulous book about the history of semiconductors. If you're at 3 nanometers, don't you have a constraint towards 2 nanometers?
Well, you're going to get to 2 nanometers eventually. You're going to get to 1 nanometer, half a nanometer, and then even smaller than that. These production technologies are only going to improve. The bottleneck, however, is that they need to do 2 things at once right now. They need to walk and chew gum. They need to improve that production technology, but at the same time, they're in the middle of a move from bringing chip production out of Taiwan to other places. Soon, you're going to see Apple at full steam at a plant in Arizona. They're going to eventually work on some plants in Europe. So you're talking about having to do 2 things at once. Make your production technology better and move it outside of Taiwan because they need the additional production capacity. But there are real concerns geopolitically, in terms of world affairs, in terms of potential world disasters. Why would we put all of our chips in one location? If Taiwan goes down, Apple goes down, so to speak, for a long time. So that needs to be resolved.
On our new digital distribution on YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. With us, an extended conversation, our chief correspondent, Apple and Technology, Mark Gurman. Paul?
Hey, Mark, a lot of folks feel like with China, maybe not the growth story for Apple that it used to be, that the company really needs to look to India in a bigger way. And they need a lower cost phone, arguably, to do that. Is this 16E, is that the phone that they introduced this week? Is that maybe something that could be really competitive in a market like India?
First of all, I want to add to what you said about China. So China, you're right, it's no longer a growth story, but it's, I would say, a decline story at this point, right? We saw sales fall 11% on an annual basis. They're about $8 billion less a quarter in revenue than they were just a couple of years ago in that region. And this, when Tim Cook became CEO replacing Steve Jobs in 2011, that was really the number one priority, was making things work in China. In his first few years there was some real innovation when it came to the iPhone. They brought the bigger iPhone 6 and 6 Plus to China just a few years after he became CEO. And at the same time, he himself struck a deal with China Mobile, biggest carrier in China. So they had the twofold. They had that phablet-sized device that everyone loves, right? In addition to access to more consumers than they ever had before. And so that was like a lightning bolt for them. But since then, they've sort of petered out a little bit there. India is very important. They believe they have very small market share there. It's sub 5%. The way they see it is they have 95% left to go after, right? And I think they're slowly growing there, but they are going to gain some steam there. Unfortunately, to your point, the iPhone 16e, with that device, they've abandoned the budget market. But there are some little tricks and levers they can pull. So you're going to have that $600 starting price for the iPhone 16e. But what I think you're going to see is a bigger push into clearance phones, so the older phones, refurbished phones and some of the older models that they don't advertise on their website, that they're going to keep pushing through resellers in India. We may not hear about it here in the States or in Europe, but in India, they're going to be selling those things through resellers.
So how does the company view China? Is this they're managing a declining business, or is this something that they think they can salvage potentially?
I think the optimists in the company believe that they can salvage it. It's a real problem for them. You have the slowed sales in China. You have the current tariffs situations. You have the geopolitical concerns.
Yep.
And oh, by the way, at the same time, that 30 years we spent building up the world's biggest supply chain, the most intricate supply chain, entirely based, or not entirely based, heavily based in China. By the way, we're in the middle of moving that to more places. US, India, Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia.
What's the time frame for that? Like, again, you said 30 years to build up that supply chain that really was centered around China. Is it a similar time frame to try to decouple itself from China?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, that took a long time to build. And so they've been working on decoupling themselves from China starting already, 6-7 years ago, right? Even 8 years ago, towards the beginning of the Trump administration. COVID gave it increased prominence and importance, but this is going to take a while. They've really not moved the needle in terms of moving out of China. And by the way, I don't expect them to fully move out of China. This is about augmenting and growing. So if they think they're going to double their user base in 30 years, you need more capacity. They've probably filled up what they can do in China, and they need other places to build the rest.
When the release comes out, you've been very good about this, but the rest of the street's touchy-feely, soft questions about product. I go log the growth of services and iPhone revenue, and services is growing so steady and so large, it's literally back to just pre-pandemic iPhone revenue. Do you, in your reporting, see a true persistency of services growth to justify the bull case?
Yes, you have to ask yourself, Tom, what would the case be for Apple? How would investors feel about Apple? What would we be saying about Apple if it wasn't for the services story right now? They knew about a decade ago that they needed to augment their device sales with a new growth story, and that is services. Apple TV Plus, I think there's an opportunity as early as next year or the year after to release an ad-supported version. And I'm not saying I'm the biggest fan of the content on Apple TV Plus, but they have a lot of fans and they have some absolutely terrific shows. And I think they're making some money on the $10 per month subscription. But once they do an advertising model and get people hooked to more great shows, I think that's going to be the real moneymaker for them, and that's ads. I think ads is sort of the secret lever they can pull. I actually wrote a few days ago that they're seriously considering bringing ads to Apple Maps. Apple Maps is one of the most used apps on the iPhone ecosystem, don't forget. 2 billion plus devices strong there. So I think there's opportunities putting ads in some places that could be a nice little growth story for them.
Have we moved past the period where if you're an investor, you're just an Apple observer, it's about the next product launch? What's going to change? What's going to be the next new thing? Have we kind of moved past that? Is that we are kind of where we are, and now we need to think of other areas of growth?
I think investors need to move past that. I'm not moved past it because I always will still see Apple as the company that brings out major new products and revolutionizes things. But I think with the Vision Pro and the AI push has showed us that they're not able right now, or they don't have that magic formula to bring out that major hit that is a game changer like the iPhone was, the iPad was, the Apple Watch was to some extent. And so this is a company that instead of coming out with a new $100 billion a year device, they need to come out with a bunch of smaller bets that add up to the revenue that would come from a bigger bet. So let me give you a few of those,
Please, give me a few.
Okay. Robotics. That's going to be a big endeavor. Tabletop robot, right? It's a
tabletop robot.
Yes, so it's a smart home hub, a big iPad-like display on a robotic arm that moves around on your desk and has a personality, right? It's like a companion in your workspace.
Can you get the 17-year-old to empty the dishwasher?
Okay, well, you may not be able to get your 17-year-old to empty the dishwasher, but you may one day be able to get an Apple humanoid robot to empty your dishwasher. And the humanoid is so interesting. I know it sounds ridiculous, but this is where the industry is going. Meta is starting a multi-billion-dollar division as of last week to develop humanoid technology. They want to be the Intel, Qualcomm, Android of the robotics industry. I'm telling you, this is the next big thing.
Okay,
in
but
technology.
you and others told us about the stupid goggle thing that went down in flames. What's a humanoid robot?
I'm not saying it's not going to go down in flames. I'm saying it's coming.
Okay, fair. Nice distinction. Mark Gurman continues with us. We're thrilled to have him in our New York studio. It's usually ensconced on the left coast. Mark Gurman, of course, driving all of our Apple coverage in definitive around the world for his voice on Apple News. Of course, very quiet about his sources, as he should be. I want to go to what nobody ever talks about anymore. I remember, forget about the Wayback Macs, but I remember being in absolute awe of 16 megabytes of RAM. We got M4. I guess I got M5 coming now. Yep. I got, in my music thing at home, I got a big Mac Pro 16. The thing's got bells and whistles on it. Do computers still matter to them? And do they want to put out a cutting-edge computer still for creative America, creative globe?
Oh, absolutely. I think that they were, more than think, they were teetering on the Mac about a decade ago. There was a multi-year period between 2015, 2018, where they weren't really coming out with redesigned computers. They weren't doing frequent updates. And the problem was twofold. One, they believed maybe too heavily in the iPad, right? The iPad is the future. But then Intel, they were really a laggard, not doing a great job with their chips, not bringing the performance gains Apple wanted. And then you compared the performance of phones and tablets compared to what you're getting from the Mac in terms of year-over-year efficiency improvements. They were in different worlds. But Apple moving to its own silicon, you mentioned Johnny Srouji, 5 years ago in the Mac, that really changed everything for them. It had sales skyrocket. Last quarter...
It was 9%.
Well, yes. Well, in the last quarter, it was about 15% year-over-year growth for the Mac. And so that was very significant. And so I think they now have the resources and the confidence to even double down on the Mac. So what I think you're going to see... What does that mean? Well, you're going to see new Pro machines this year. Creatives, you talked about creatives. You'll get your new Mac Pro. You'll get your new Mac Studio with the M4, M5. They've now moved the MacBook Pro
to... Okay, you're talking to Mrs. Keene right now. Keep it up.
Yes, the Mac Pro...
We need a new M5.
Yes, Tom needs his new M5 or M4 Mac Pro. The iMac will get another update. They've moved the MacBook Pro, which is not their most popular machine, but a really hot seller and really important. It's what I use. It's what I think a lot of people here use, a lot of people in college and schools use. They've moved that to an annual upgrade cycle. Every November, like clockwork, you're getting a new MacBook Pro, just like you get a new iPhone every year. So that is a really big deal, and I think is really important. MacBook Air, that's the most popular Mac, okay? Last updated a year ago. Here's a scoop for your show. Apple's preparing to put the new MacBook Air M4 on sale in March, so next month, in just a few weeks from now. They've started preparations. They've started sending materials to their retail stores. They've ramped up production, and they're nearly ready to go on the M4, 13-inch and 15-inch MacBook Air, their most popular machine, just in a few weeks from now.
150,000 employees. Is this still the cool place to work if you're in this biz?
Good question.
Well,
good question.
I'll answer that in a second. But I think the way that I would see it is you're working at a place where you're impacting 2 billion plus consumers.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it, yeah.
And you're influencing the products that you probably use on a daily basis. So I think that's at least what the company sells to their employees. In terms of the cool stuff, in order to keep engineers at a company who've been there 20, 30 years, still interested, you need to give them some moonshots. And so the Vision Pro was a moonshot.
Interesting.
The self-driving car was a moonshot. And so they probably kept around people at Apple who wanted to leave quite a bit longer just by throwing them on these new projects and just pushing them from new moonshot to new special project group to new special project group instead of having them, flee to Google or Meta.
Yep.
Tim Cook, Auburn, 1982. Just get that in there for Duke. Who's after Tim Cook? I mean, we're fixated by Iger in Disney. I don't see people fixated about who's after Tim Cook. Should we?
You're seeing one person right now who's fixated on who's after Tim Cook because I think it's a fascinating story. He's been there around 3 decades at this point. He's been in the job since 2011. He's going to be pushing 65 next year. But then you look at this, right? You have Jamie Dimon. He's in his late 60s, right?
Old.
You've got Iger, who's in his almost going to be in his mid 70s. There's a universe that Tim Cook could stick around at Apple for a Bob Iger like tenure. Now, Iger took a few Michael Jordan-like breaks, in between, so that's a little bit unique. I think Cook's got, 3 to 7 years there left in the tank. Now, you look at Apple's executive team. Here's the problem. They're all in their mid-60s, or going to be in their mid-60s, late 60s by the time Cook retires, right? You've only got one person on that executive team who has the ability to step in there in 5 to 7 years, be CEO, and stick in the role for a decade. That is Mr. John Turnus, the Senior Vice President of Hardware Engineering. He's in charge of the devices business, right? He's not an operations guy. Maybe he's not a business guy or design guy, but he's the one in charge of their money makers.
We're out of time. Are you going to come back to New York soon? Should we can do it remote from Michael's in Santa Monica.
The LA office is phenomenal.
It is.
Century City, extraordinary.
Shay Gurman, Mark Gurman, on behalf of all of us on Team Bloomberg Surveillance, thank you so much for your work.
Thank you all.
It is definitive to be at midnight, and there'll be some story out of Taipei or Singapore. Gurman says. They never say Tucker says, but there it is with the news in New York City. John Tucker.
All right, let's start with this. Israel's prime minister this morning promising revenge after officials in Israel say one of the 4 bodies handed over by Hamas was not that of Shuri Bibas. Israeli officials say they don't know whose remains they are. In a statement, the prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, says the cruelty of Hamas knows no bounds. Senate lawmakers voting well into the night and into this morning over a series of budget amendments. Republicans are trying to advance the first part of a budget bill that Democrats say will give tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans. Senate Minority Leader, Democrat Chuck Schumer.
This debate is going to go on for weeks and maybe months. Democrats will be ready to come back and do this over and over again because Americans deserve to know the truth. And what is the truth? Under Donald Trump's Republican Party, billionaires win and American families lose.
The Senate was able to pass a version of a resolution early today. Democrats say the process is far from over. Thousands of government workers, the target of President Trump's job cuts. The administration insists they're firing people for cause, but many of these fired workers have only been on the job for less than 2 years. They say it's news to them. Nicholas Berardi works for the IRS in Philadelphia.
It even says here in the email that they're citing the reason why I'm fired is because of my performance. But until today, I hadn't gotten a performance review.
Well, the president's top economic advisor insists the thousands of workers who have been fired deserved to be let go. And Major League Baseball spring training, of course, underway. Something new in the game as the Cubs took on the Dodgers. Computer robot umpires double-checking the work of the real umpires. A new automated ball and strike calling system. It's not replacing human umpires, but will allow for challenges. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg Time.
I'm watching the Cubs of the Dodgers, and everybody's doing this. On YouTube, on radio, I'm tapping my forehead. The pitcher goes like this.
Yeah.
And then the umpire goes like this. If Bob Uecker was around, he'd make it feel it's like a new symbol. What do? They argue about balls and strikes?
I don't know.
There's a new thing. I don't know.
Pitchers and catchers.
They do this. Good morning. It's Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by, hold on, let me, 3, 2. This Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Oracle. Attention growing businesses, Oracle offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. For new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment, offer ends March 31st. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. All right, we've got a mixed look on Wall Street right now. We have the NASDAQ leading the gains up 0.3%. Dow futures leading the losses down about 0.5%. S&P futures, they are little changed. We have the 2-year yield, 4.26%. That's a little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.49%, and that's down about 1 basis point. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.2%. On the economic calendar for today, we have readings from S&P Global, U.S. manufacturing and services. We also have data on existing home sales and consumer sentiment. Over to shares of United Health. We're tracking them closely, down 11%. It's after that report from the Wall Street Journal that the U.S. Justice Department begun investigating its billing practices. Then we go over to shares of Rivian. They're down 5%. Said its EV deliveries this year are going to fall short of estimates. And finally, shares of Celsius getting a nice jolt up 32%, acquiring rival energy drink brand Alanine New for $1.8 billion in cash and stock. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. Wherever you get your podcasts, I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Thank you for the many comments on Mark Gurman being with us. That was absolutely fascinating. He's, I don't know anybody that has the impact he has worldwide.
No, he just does a phenomenal.
Absolutely
I mean,
unique.
his beat is Apple. And he does it as well or better than anybody.
Yeah,
I think.
Just absolutely extraordinary. Right now, we're going to go to the economy. We have been remiss in walking away from, Fed analysis and all the rest of it. But there's a lot of economic data coming up to stagger. A lot of economic data until the next Fed meeting. Jonathan Pingle joins now with UBS. Jonathan, I look at your research, and I'm looking at granularity like claims rise. In the granularity, the weekly data, that's the meat and potatoes of UBS, is there stress there or not in the labor market?
Well, actually, one of the interesting things we've seen, Tom, is we've started to see, some claims percolating out of the federal workers
already,
as well as in D.C. Yeah, it's it's not a lot. You're talking, if you look at D.C. claims, the federal workers, you're talking hundreds, but. I do think that's a little bit interesting as, just the inkling of kind of where we might be going forward. I mean, overall, the economy looks fine. I think you're right. The Fed's on hold. But, when we get to this summer, things could look a whole lot different.
So, Jonathan, how do you think this employment environment is going to play out? We had Danielle DiMartino Booth in our studio yesterday, and she thinks these unemployment numbers are going to get a little bit scarier as we go throughout the year because of private layoffs as well as what we're seeing coming out of the government and DOGE. How do you think the labor market's going to play out?
No, I kind of agree. I mean, I think, if you think about what happened in 2024 and you go back to like a winter a year ago, everything looked great. Initial claims were low. The December employment report looked good. January looked fine. But by the time you got to the summer, the pendulum had swung quite a lot. And I think we're really going to see basically a replay of that pattern this year where right now everything looks kind of hunky-dory. The FOMC's got the wind at their backs. They've got the luxury of being able to wait. But I do think that by the time we get to the summer, you're going to have a slightly higher unemployment rate. The pace of job gains is going to look a little bit more worrisome. And they're going to be faced with a little bit more of a trade-off between inflation and growth.
Do you have to a tenth of a percentage point number that's a tip point emotionally for politicians in Washington? Do you have to get to 5.0, dare I say 5.1, or is it 4.x where the sweat begins?
Tom, well, that's a good question. I don't think the sweat is necessarily the level. I think the direction of travel could start to worry them like it did last year, right? I mean, when the unemployment rate got up to 4.25, it was just the fact that it had been rising and payroll employment growth was slowing, that if you'd walked forward the implications a few more months, that I think that started to worry the FOMC. When I think about like the sort of the thresholds, though, for the policymakers, and I do think 100,000 for non-farm payroll employment is kind of an important threshold. Like, I mean, if they're seeing job gains below that, particularly since a big chunk of those job gains are going to be concentrated in, say, healthcare, I do think that's the kind of thing that would start to really worry them and make them think about how restrictive monetary policy is.
Jonathan Pingle with us with the UBS. We continue. Paul?
Jonathan, talk to us about the U.S. consumer here. We've got the U.S. consumer that, if this consumer wants a job, has a job, having some pretty decent wage gains, maybe even above the rate of inflation. How do you think about the U.S. consumer today?
Well, I think there's basically two consumers. I think there's, you've got the, sort of the upper income households that, still have a lot of liquid assets. They've got high levels of wealth, home equity wealth, and cash. But you are increasingly seeing the, not necessarily distressed. There's certainly a lot of households under stress, but you're certainly seeing, whether it's savings, liquid assets, and even to some extent delinquency rates really starting to seep into the middle. And I think you're hearing that a little bit on some of the comments coming out in the surveys and from the retailers as well. I do think, though, if the labor market slows, now that more and more households are having to fit their spending within their budgets, I do think that that points to a slowing probably in consumer spending as we go into the summer.
Where's your real GDP dynamic? I got 8 opinions here. The divergence of opinions, Jonathan, given the political joy we're going through, is amazing. But does UBS have a conviction of the path of real GDP?
I have great conviction it's going to slow. It was 2.5% Q4 over Q4 in 2024. I think we're going to lose a lot of the support from government, state, local, and federal, as well as some cooling in consumer spending. I think with some soggy investment, trade risks, I think we probably end up around 1.75% for 2025 as a whole. Obviously 4 quarters from now, I could look very, very wrong, but I do think the direction of travel is probably slower.
So, Jonathan, given all that backdrop here, how do you think this Federal Reserve is going to move through the remainder of the year? I'm looking at the WIRP function on the Bloomberg terminal. It's kind of only maybe like 38, 40 basis points of cuts for the year. Does that seem reasonable to you?
Yeah, we've got 2 cuts in our forecast, essentially a replay of sort of the pattern that happened last year where they see soggier labor markets in the summer and then turn towards cuts in September and December. I wouldn't rule out a cut in June, given the fact that I think we will see some improvement on inflation. But I think right now they're really hamstrung by the trade policy. I think that there's a lot of uncertainty over all the various proposals that have been rolled out, what the impacts are. They could be negative for growth, positive for inflation. I really think it's left the Fed in a state where they're not quite sure what they can do, even if the inflation gave them room to cut, until they get a little bit more clarity on trade policy.
Jonathan Pingle, thank you so much. At UBS today, as we dash forward to a Fed meeting, lots of economic data coming up. Paul, this won't go away, and you're way more knowledgeable than I am. A couple weeks ago, it was like, okay, how does an average family do the Sweeney tour of Orlando?
Oh, boy.
In Disney.
Yeah.
And this story won't go today. It's over to Paris. And there's something called dynamic airline pricing.
Yeah.
Which is they're changing the price. If Taylor Swift's going to show up, the price goes up.
Yep.
I'm making a joke. But it's amazing the desire to get that revenue to come in for a $300 family goofy breakfast.
Yeah, it's the cost there of somebody. Oh, it's not just Disney; it's all the experiences here. But Disney, I think has generally been the leader on dynamic pricing for a whole host of businesses, including their theme park business.
Is it still thumb up?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a business in the theme park business, Tom, and including the cruise ships, is really the number one source of profitability for the company today. It used to be the cable networks led by ESPN. That is no longer the case. The number one profit driver, because of the decline of the cable network TV business, has been the theme parks. And so as a result, they have increased their capital spending investments over the next decade for theme parks globally and their cruise ships. They've really stepped up that investment. So they're all in on this, what they call experiences, Tom. That's the segment they call it now.
Experiences.
Yeah,
I call it trying not to get too much maple syrup on cherubs.
Exactly.
Is the experience.
Yeah. So
dynamic ticket pricing.
Sure. Yeah, and they've been aggressive. They were the first ones to introduce a little bracelet that you had that was everything from your room key And you could charge anything, and it just literally the ease of just putting your wrist up against a cash register to buy something increased guest spending dramatically. They were the first ones to do that. Now every resort does that. So they've always kind of been on the cutting edge.
Pro tip, what is the number one thing to avoid in Orlando, Paul Sweeney?
Oh, I don't know. I think, I would tell you this. Everybody's doubling down on Orlando, Tom. Universal is opening up a new, huge park in March down in Orlando. And the question, is that going to be competitively negative for Disney, or will it just bring more people to Orlando?
I just figured it. You know what they need? A congestion tax.
Yes, exactly.
That's what'll do it.
In Magic Kingdom.
John Tucker will have the local news in New York City on a fiercely debated debate with Washington. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, the tech-heavy NASDAQ gaining strong after this is earnings from Alibaba kind of sparked that optimism over artificial intelligence. So the NASDAQ leading the gains right now, up 0.3%. That's for NASDAQ futures, up 80 points. Dow futures down 0.5%, 262 points. S&P futures, they are little changed. The yield on the 2-year, 4.27%. That's little changed. And the yield on the 10-year, 4.49%. That's down 1 basis point. To commodities, we have the Bloomberg. We have the COMEX gold, $2,943 an ounce. Brent crude, $76 a barrel. WTI crude, $72 a barrel. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.2%. Shares of Dropbox, well, they're dropping, down 6%. Analysts noted concerns over user trends, growth in its fourth quarter results. Then you have shares of digital payments firm Block. That's the parent company of Cash App, Square. Also, software firm Akami Technologies. They're slipping. Weak guidance. Block down 9%. Akamai Technologies, that's how you say it, down 9%. And a quick nugget for you, Bloomberg reporting private credit. Well, it's minted 18 billionaires worth $61 billion collectively. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Let's pause there quickly, Paul. I mean, private credit, private equity, I got to be honest, all my radar's up because everybody's loving it.
Yep.
They're minting billionaires.
They are. Private equity's always been, you can make outsized asymmetrical returns. Just look at some of the leading private equity players. Now private credit is just, over the last, 10, 12, 14 years, it's just taken tremendous amounts of capital.
If you go around from our Queen Victoria Street office, and there's some blue plaques on the wall, because, it's like London, there's a blue plaque everywhere. Jimi Hendrix slept here and all that. And if you turn left and go up the street and go back 400 years or 500 years, there is the advent of an institution. That's St. Bartholomew's Hospital Medical College, which became Queen Mary College. And it's this exquisite university within the University of London. Sri Kochagovindan joins us right now with Aberdeen. Thrilled that she could be with us with her work at University of London and on economics in general. Sri, you've got a passing understanding of the Pacific Rim. At Aberdeen, with your international reach, do you finally see China recovering?
I think there are a number of structural headwinds for China. The property market is clearly still a headwind there, a drag there. But we have seen some very interesting developments across AI and technology. And I think that's been a real fuel for the Chinese equity market in recent weeks. And I think that's likely to be a continuation. What's interesting there is the fact that despite all the chip restrictions, they are still making developments there. And that's really been part of the fuel. Now, whether or not this is sustainable going forward, you do need other pieces of the puzzle to be falling into place as well. So that's something to remember.
I mean, to me, it's fascinating as this percolates in the tumult of America and such. What's your feeling, on the buy side, looking at huge pools of assets? What's your feeling about the sustainability of economic growth on both sides of the Atlantic?
Well, I think in terms of the growth outlook, if we take the US, very robust there, very tight labor market, activity data there is a slower momentum. However, it's still very resilient. If we look across the other side of the Atlantic, it's a slightly different story there. If we look at the PMI data that came out today, this is our business sentiment surveys. Manufacturing, not looking so great across Europe and UK. Services, not so bad. A little bit more of a sluggish outlook there if we look at the European economy. Obviously, I think some of the key stories to be looking at, I think one aspect is what will the ECB do? We are expecting further easing and further monetary easing and support for the European economy. We have the German elections this weekend. That's going to be quite important in terms of what happens with fiscal spending going forward. And that coalition makeup over the next few weeks or months, that's going to determine what happens with the debt brake in Germany. And I think that's going to be a very interesting story for the markets over this weekend and going on further.
Sri, we're a little more than 1 month into the second administration of President Trump here. How do you and do other economists, how are you guys kind of adjusting your outlook, whether it's tariffs, trade? What kind of changes are you making or adaptations?
I think it's a case that there's a lot of news flow and there's not an awful lot of clarity. I think policy uncertainty is really the main message here. If we look at, in sum, what we're seeing is a number of different tariff headlines. There are reciprocal tariffs. There's some issues with VAT and rebates. And I think it's, at the moment, these are headlines without the clarity of how all of this is going to be calculated. So you have a number of different estimates as to where the average tariff rate for the US could be. And they could be rising from around 2 to 5% to as high as 10% or 14%. That's really quite punchy. And that's taking us back to 1930s style tariffs. So that could be quite meaningful for the economy and the outlook for different markets.
Sri, productivity I don't think is talked about enough. Maybe that'll be a theme into the Fed meeting as we get to the end of March. But what's the character of American productivity that you've seen at Aberdeen? Is it underestimated?
I think, again, a number of different moving parts there. What everybody's focusing on at the moment is the productivity going forward and how much of a boost we can get from this new technological change. And I think there are a number of different estimates there. I think ultimately for the Fed, really the focus is not necessarily productivity. It's going to be the impact on inflation. And I think with the Fed, they've maintained their easing bias. That is true. They are saying that policy rates are still in restrictive territory. However, they are likely to stay on hold because inflation is still sticky. So there is a link between productivity and inflation. But I think at the moment, they're not looking at productivity as a driver. They are looking at some of these policy implications coming from the new Trump administration. So a number of different channels through which you can get inflation. That could be migration or tariffs.
Sri, thank you so much for the Aberdeen. Sri Kochagouvian with us this morning there as we consider some of the mysteries, particularly of the American economy. This whole China thing, Paul, I'm watching.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I haven't said this in 3 years?
No, I use
all of a sudden it's like,
as my proxy, I use Alibaba, and again, that's stock is looking higher again today. It's up 60% year to date.
We'll have to see on that. Bloomberg Surveillance. We're brought to you by Commonwealth. Join over 2,000 independent financial advisors. They are taking control of their growth with advisor-centric support and future-ready technologies. Grow on your own terms with a partner dedicated to your success. Go to Commonwealth.com to learn how. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
President Trump hosting a governor's working session at the White House this morning after he urged Republican governors in a speech last night to support his agenda and boost their midterm chances. And Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw reports support for Trump's agenda at the state level is kind of complicated.
I think it varies depending on which state you're talking about. Obviously, there's some that are very a lot of Republican governors eager to hitch their star to Trump and try to follow him, and the rest of them are sort of a little bit worried and worried about crossing him and drawing his ire.
Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw. Poll numbers out on the Trump presidency. A Washington Post Ipsos poll has Trump's approval rating at 45%. With 53% of Americans disapproving. 57% say the president has exceeded his authority since taking office. The Senate has narrowly confirmed Kash Patel to lead the FBI.
The yeas are 51. The nays are 49. The confirmation is confirmed.
Senator Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska were the two Republicans to vote no in a split that otherwise fell along party lines. Patel's vowed to steer the FBI toward its traditional crime-fighting role. Critics are concerned he's going to use the role to seek political retribution. On his 83rd birthday, GOP Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, the former majority leader, confirming he's not going to seek re-election.
Representing our Commonwealth has been the honor of a lifetime.
McConnell was the longest-serving Senate party leader in American history. Dozens of major news organizations, including some conservative outlets, urging the Trump administration to stop blocking the Associated Press from press events. The White House has said it's blocking reporters from the news service because the outlet refers to the Gulf of Mexico in its articles rather than the Gulf of America as decreed by President Trump. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg. Paul, Tom, Lisa.
Lisa, would you be sure the interns aren't freezing out on Lexington Avenue? We have had a Carol Master sighting. There has been a Carol Master sighting.
Wow.
I don't know if she's in the building or not, but at least there's been a sighting. From New York, it's Bloomberg Surveillance.
You're listening to Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning, and we thank IBKR. Bloomberg Surveillance brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Will the year-over-year change in the U.S. PPI, will it exceed 3% this February of 2025? At IBKR Forecast Trader, the yes was recently at 39%. What is your take? Trade your prediction at ibkr.com/forecast. ibkr.com/forecast. I believe, Sai, tell me, we got Mandeep Singh with us here?
Sure.
Mandeep Singh, he's on Zoom. I mean, this is the way he rolls.
Well,
it's a Friday.
It's Friday.
Why don't you bring him in on Grok? Because all I know about Grok is Heinlein's science fiction in 1961. That's it.
Well, Mandeep Singh, he knows a lot more about this artificial intelligence, this AI, and Elon Musk is getting into the game in a big way with his Grok 3. Mandeep Singh, senior analyst, technology, Bloomberg Intelligence. Grok 3, how about that? Mandeep, talk to us about what Mr. Musk is bringing to the AI game.
Well, so one, he has built one of the largest GPU clusters out of all the tech companies that are out there. And we heard the CapEx numbers this quarter from all the hyperscalers. Well, xAI, which is the company that is building this foundational model, has one of the largest GPU clusters. In fact, Grok 3 was trained on about 200,000 GPUs. And so from that perspective, they have all the compute they needed in terms of training these models from scratch. And the output is, I feel, similar to what you have from the likes of ChatGPT and, Google Gemini and even DeepSeek for that matter. So when you compare Grok 3 with respect to the compute that they had versus what the other model providers had, especially DeepSeek, I mean, it feels like there isn't a lot better in terms of what Grok 3 is offering relative to the other models.
Mandeep, you're up at Columbia University where you held court years ago, and you're lecturing on all these things. Grok, I don't know, Genesis, this and that. Is it a normal competitive business where X number of years from now, there's 2 or 3 survivors?
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking about, 200,000 GPUs. So the cost of building such a data center is north of $5 billion. Now, imagine how many companies can build a data center that costs $5 billion. And, so at that scale, it is very hard, for startups to operate. And that's where hyperscalers are the only ones sort of left. And xAI is somewhat in a unique situation because of Elon Musk, but pretty much I would say that that's a good bet that there will be maximum 3 or 4 foundational model companies 5 years from now.
Is it worth at this early stage in AI to say who's leading, who's lagging, or is it everybody just kind of in the investment growth mode?
I mean, with internet businesses, there is always a first mover advantage. And, we talk about scale and network effects. It's the same with ChatGPT. The fact that they've got, 300 million weekly active users, the reason for that is they were early to it. They had that, UI in terms of captivating the audience. And that's why they've been so successful. Now, the gap is narrowing in terms of the functionality that other model providers are offering. But ChatGPT still has the lead when it comes to the consumer side of things.
Mandeep, next time you're in the studio with us, you can still use Zoom. Yeah. You can, like Zoom.
Sure.
Is that like internal Zoom?
Yeah, we can.
He's 6 feet from us, but it feels like Zoom. Cool.
Yeah, he always makes the effort to come up to the studio.
Mandeep Singh, thank you for all your support of what we do here and explaining what I don't. Grok.
Yeah.
Have you used Grok?
No, but Lisa Mateo is a Grok person on X, I think, or I don't know.
You could use it. There's a little button at the bottom if you look on Twitter.
And what does it do?
And you can use it. If you want something, you put it in there, and it will find it for you.
Can it get you eggs at Costco?
It cannot. It can tell you the price.
Yes.
Do you know it's Friday?
That's what they tell us.
We're deep into 2025.
Yep.
We need a cure.
I don't care if Monday's blue, Tuesday's grey and Wednesday too. Thursday, I don't care about you, it's Friday, I'm in love. Monday, you can fall apart. Tuesday, Wednesday, break my heart. Oh, Thursday doesn't even start, it's Friday, I'm in love.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
The president wants lower interest rates from Chairman Powell.
You can make the argument that this is a really rich market.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
President Trump signing a wide range of executive orders.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Green in the screen, except the Dow down 0.6% off United Healthcare. Wall Street Journal article suggesting billing challenges and investigation by DOJ. To be honest, Paul, I have not read every word of the wonderful article, but it's out there. It moved the market.
It's out there, moved the market, and anybody who looks at your healthcare bill, I don't know how you make heads or tails out of it.
Small caps, Russell up 0.7%. The NASDAQ up 0.4%. The DAX, I haven't looked at. It's Friday, and they need to get to Monday. And if they're going to get to Monday, they've got to do it with a German election.
Yep.
And we're going to have special coverage of that. Let's do it right now. Sunday, this is at 12 noon New York time, 12 noon East Coast time. German election special by someone who's deserved the coverage. Francine Lacroix will be anchoring that with Oliver Cook and Kay Gupta.
Solid.
It's solid. I mean, Oliver's got legit Berlin cred, so that will be important. And we've heard from numerous guests it matters.
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty politically in Germany, France. There's a lot of issues out there.
Yeah, we'll have to see as well. So get red and green on the screen. The VIX is really a story this week. It's gone nowhere, 15.29. Bloomberg Surveillance, we're always brought to you by IBKR. Will the average U.S. temperature in February 2025, will it exceed 36 degrees Fahrenheit, not Celsius? Good morning, Germany.
It's freezing out.
36 degrees Fahrenheit at IBKR forecast trader. The yes was recently at 44%. What's your take? Trade your predictions at ibkr.com/forecasts. To our news, our Bloomberg Business Flash.
Yes, we
on
can
a
do
Friday
that.
is news.
Yep.
Here's Lisa Mateo.
It is, and it's AI optimism. That's the news lifting NASDAQ futures, giving a nice lift to Chinese stocks. This is all after e-commerce company Alibaba reported strong results, promised more investment in AI. Its shares up 14% in Hong Kong. It's also giving a little bit of a lift to its peers like JD.com, up 5% in Hong Kong. The Hang Seng Index surged 4%. Back here, we go to NASDAQ futures up 0.4%. Dow futures down 0.5%. Like you said, a big part of that, the sell-off in United Health after that report from the Journal that the Justice Department investigating its billing practices, its shares down 12%. S&P futures, they are a little changed. The 2-year yield 4.26%, little changed, and the yield on the 10-year 4.49%, and that's down 1 basis point. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down 0.2%. Finally, shares of Nissan higher 9% in Tokyo after a report from the Financial Times that this high-level Japanese group has drawn up plans for Tesla to invest in it. But a former Tesla member who's named as part of the group, he says, well, I have no involvement. And he says, I'm not aware of any such deal. Tesla shares up 0.3%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
I start about 1 a.m., 2 a.m. and reading 12 newspapers, just trying to get the lay of the land, and never. And I've been doing this for like 6 or 7 years. Never have I seen the bedlam at 2 a.m. like I see now off of the European press, Le Monde in France, the Telegraph in London. Extraordinary. We speak with Face the Nation's Margaret Brennan, of course. See it on CBS television Sunday morning, and we have it at 2 p.m. on Bloomberg Radio. Margaret, I'm going to start with an audible because you're so good at foreign affairs. Can you describe CBS and Face the Nation's reporting on the state of Marco Rubio, not only percolating in Europe this morning, but also the New York Times suggesting a story in Riyadh is radically different than what was occurring in Europe? Give us a Margaret Brennan update on Marco Rubio as Secretary of State.
Well, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is on paper the top diplomat for the United States, but President Trump has decided to put all these other envoys in place. So they have competing control over portfolios. Keith Kellogg is in Kyiv right now trying to talk to the Ukrainians about some kind of diplomatic deal. He's a Russia hawk. You've got Steve Witkoff, will be my guest on Sunday, who's reaching out to the Russians. And for somebody like Marco Rubio, who in the Senate was very clear that it was Russia who started the war, who was very clear that Vladimir Putin is an adversary of the United States, it is very different to see him now executing the President Trump's vision of not in any way criticizing Vladimir Putin, but rather reaching out to him. And Secretary Rubio was on the program last Sunday. He said, one phone call, one meeting does not peace make, and that this is a test to see if there's something there. At a minimum, though, the one thing that Rubio said is charging ahead is reopening U.S.-Russian diplomatic channels with plussing up the number of diplomats in each country, starting to try to normalize things. And that's a huge switch because Vladimir Putin had been isolated with global international sanctions punishing him for his decision to start this war.
And that's kind of where I want to go, Margaret. What's the feeling within Washington, D.C., within the State Department about this seemingly significant shift in policy as it relates to Russia?
Well, this is the thing. You have the political appointees saying, oh, President Trump thinks outside the box. Well, when you publicly cut an ally out at the knees, as he did with his remarks about Volodymyr Zelensky this week, it does disrupt and cause concern among allies. You have next week the UK Prime Minister, the French President, and other leaders really trying to call on President Trump and saying, wait a second, can we trust that the U.S. will stick with NATO and stick with the defense of Europe writ large? Because they are not at all convinced that Vladimir Putin will end this war or stop at Ukraine's borders. They are concerned about further aggression against them. And so that's how it's being received. There is some shock among Republicans, even though right now very few people will publicly criticize the President of the United States in public.
I got 8 ways to go here. Let me go vamp. I'm going to vamp off that, Margaret. I think it's too important. Greg Villiers has a blistering note out this morning, and this is decades back, Paul. I mean, back to when Mitch McConnell started. Greg Villiers says, Margaret, there has never been as large a breach between public chat and private conversation on Capitol Hill. Is that what CBS is reporting?
Yes. I mean, well, it's what we're experiencing, certainly. What you hear privately versus what is said publicly. And, as someone who does a lot of these live interviews on Sunday, you will see very gentle criticism just starting to begin. Right. I have a guest Sunday, Senator John Curtis of Utah, who is praising DOJ, saying this is absolutely the right thing to do, but can we have a little compassion mixed in? Why is he doing that? Because these senators are starting to see how some of these cuts are impacting their states and their constituents. So there's the beginnings of the most gentle pushback on certain things that impact them. When it comes to Ukraine, you did last week in Munich have some strong words from Senator Wicker, for example, the head of the Armed Services Committee. But this week he says, everyone's on the same page. It's really hard to understand what the actual position is.
And this is what Face a Nation is about. You got Witkoff, who's got a deserved reputation in real estate. And he's a huge donor of Hofstra University. He's a business guy who the president's very comfortable with. And then you got a guy who was a former mayor of Provo, dominant at Brigham Young University as well. How do you perceive this president, what, Paul, 4 weeks in?
Sure. Yep.
Deep into his term, Margaret. How will this president talk to the constituency of Witkoff and the constituency of Curtis?
Well, right now, President Trump believes he has a mandate to do what he wants, and he is challenging Congress to stand up to him, which we haven't really seen yet when it comes to, for example, complaints that there isn't the advise and consent that would normally be taking place when, for example, an agency enshrined in law is dismantled by the president. Congress is being very gentle in its criticism of saying, wait a second, you don't have the power to do that. So it's amazing, the disconnect that you pointed out between what's said privately and what's said publicly. And it's not entirely clear to me what people are so afraid of but there is a fear of speaking publicly, which puts journalists like us in a very strange position, I will say, Tom.
To say the least. Margaret Brennan, thank you so much. With CBS, of course, Face the Nation, the Sunday morning effort at CBS, and of course, Sunday, 2 p.m. on Bloomberg Radio in New York, Washington, D.C., and Bloomberg at 92.9 FM. Paul, we have an esteemed guest who has been patient. Yes. Ellen Zentner would never be this patient.
No,
exactly.
About it. Sarah Wolf joins us, Tom. She's senior economist and strategist, thematic and macro investing at a little shop called Morgan Stanley. Sarah, thanks so much for joining us here in our studio here. What is the thematic economic call here? Because Tom and I, we sit here, and Lisa, and the news flow just comes flying at us from a million different directions. We're not sure kind of how to put it all together. How are you guys thinking about just the economic backdrop?
We try to look through all the noise and focus on what are the big themes that are going to be coming out of all of this. So on the macro front, where are long run rates going to shake out? Where's neutral going to be once we get through all the noise of this year? And we're feeling pretty confident. It's quite a bit higher than where it was before. Okay. Somewhere around 3.5%, could even be 4% if we're talking about over the next 5 years. And so while there's going to be a lot of policy volatility, economic volatility, inflation volatility, we try to look beyond that, especially when we're advising our financial advisors at Morgan Stanley. We're also focused on these other large themes just outside of the direct macro. So with everything going on with Russia and Ukraine, one of our big themes has been defense that we've been calling out. And with Trump increasing its alliance with Russia, this is only going to cause for more defense spending coming from our NATO allies in Europe. And we think there's going to be a significant revitalization in the defense industrial base in the U.S. as well. So we're focused on the macro themes, and then we're focused on what are going to be some of the big winners with that shakeout from all this change in geopolitics as well.
How about the technology here? AI has been a huge theme. How does that factor into kind of your thematic view of kind of opportunities out there? Is that still a driver?
We definitely still think that there's room to run on AI, and it definitely doesn't need to be just the enablers. We think a lot of opportunity is in these ancillary beneficiaries of AI that can use the software. So biotech, pharma is a very clear example of this. We've also identified defense, and Elon Musk is going to push pretty heavily for this as SpaceX rises as one of the biggest contractors for the DoD eventually. But we really need to learn how to incorporate AI and new technology. And then, we've identified a lot of other beneficiaries like supply chains, manufacturing. There's going to be a really big coming to head between Trump and Musk on Trump wants to bring jobs back to the U.S. with onshoring and bringing manufacturing. But Elon's all about automation, right, and AI. And so how do we balance those two different priorities?
The heritage of Morgan Stanley economics is one big argument. Steve Roach invented this, and it's like cats and dogs. I can't imagine the constructive debates, professional debates going on under Seth Carpenter and your complete Morgan Stanley economics combine. You with Ellen Zentner have this massive advantage of focus on the American consumer. Is with everything going on, whether you're Republican or Democrat, is nominal GDP threatened, which will dampen or diminish 70% of real GDP.
Yeah, I mean, the two obvious things here are tariffs and immigration. Even with volatility this year, if you take out a huge chunk of our population and you increase the cost of doing business globally, that is going to weigh on potential GDP in the U.S. And both are estimated to weigh on potential GDP by 1/10 to 2/10 over the long run, those two separate aggressive policies on immigration and tariffs. And so if you are optimistic on a higher potential GDP in this new world, maybe 2%, maybe a little bit higher, that could get notched back down to 1.5%. The other thing that we have to factor in, though, is AI, right? So there's so many moving.
AI into the consumption. Excuse me.
Well, if we're talking about potential GDP, if we're talking about potential GDP, all these things offset each other, right?
Are you going to pop
productivity.
with AI, are we going to pop potential GDP over 2%?
Depends how much there's going to be an offset from some of these structural headwinds from demographics. Right. So it's hard to know right now how it's all going to shake out. Right now, I think that a lot of what we're seeing for tariffs could just be negotiating. So in the long run, it might not have an effect. But immigration's playing out. We have to believe that it's going to happen, and that's going to weigh on demographics in the U.S.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, with Lisa Mateo and Sarah Wolf here, we have to make a decision. Paul, if I look at the facial hair policy of Bloomberg surveillance, you know, what do you think? Neatly groomed? Is that where I'm?
That's how
like
we
a
roll
Matt
here.
Miller. Sarah, what
Well,
do you
Matt
think?
Miller, I don't know.
I like a little stubble.
You like
Yeah,
a little,
stubble.
even if it's as ancient as this?
Yes, a little,
Mateo?
It's a little rough around
salt
the edges.
stubble.
Is a rock carefully bearded?
No, he's shaved and
We go to our Yankees fan, going back to Mr. Steinbrenner in 1976, Paul Sweeney.
Yep.
This momentous announcement.
It is. It's big news here that Yankees are revising their policy. A change to their strict facial hair policy. They will allow players to wear, quote, well-groomed beards. That's big.
That is big.
I mean, the economic impact of that, I'm sure Morgan Stanley's crunching
Was this
the numbers.
one player? Is it like somebody
No,
had
it's
a...
for every, I mean, you know all the young guys, they like the, you know, it's like the John Farrow look. I mean, who wears it better than John Farrow?
You know, I mean, if he's, I mean...
Matt
I
Miller?
agree with it.
I mean, the young guns. That's how they roll, Tom.
I mean, Mattingly got in trouble for this years ago. I mean,
Yep.
you know, there it is. It's seismic for baseball. Do you think the ESPN contract had something to do with this?
Exactly.
What are the restrictions on different shapes? Can you get goatees?
I don't know. This could be something that seems like it's a
Mustache.
Good morning.
Where do you draw the line?
Good morning, Morgan Stanley compliance. Sarah Wolf, is there a beard policy at Morgan Stanley?
Everything goes, but we tend to see clean shaven at banks. Yeah, we saw some COVID beards though. Beards, though, yes.
Unless they're 6'5" and have a trust fund, then they can wear whatever beard they want. Sarah Wolf, thank you so much for being with us. Really important conversation there. And as we get to the Fed meeting, Sarah Wolf, Ellen Zentner, all the team at Morgan Stanley on the place of American consumption here. We got red and green on the screen. I got the NASDAQ up 0.4%. With our news in New York City, a beard on the way. John Tucker.
Tom, let's start with this. Israel's military says Hamas has violated the Gaza ceasefire deal by handing over an anonymous body instead of one of the hostages. The IDF says the remains they were given were not those of Shuri Bibas, who was captured alongside her two sons in the October 7th attacks. All of them died. Here's Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking through an interpreter.
We will work with determination to bring Shuri home together with all our hostages, both living and dead, and ensure that Hamas pays the full price for this cruel and malicious violation of the agreement.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Hamas is due to free 6 living hostages tomorrow, accelerating the original plan of a staggered return across 2 weeks. President Trump telling Republican governors they'll do better in the midterms if they embrace his agenda. The president addressing the Republican Governors Association in Washington last night.
My administration will be fighting to help your state succeed and prosper, and together we're going to bring back the American dream, something nobody talks about anymore.
Well, the president's poll with governors going to face its first test in races in Virginia and New Jersey later this year. 70 million Americans from Texas to the East Coast bracing for life-threatening, dangerous cold. Teens and 20s expected all the way down to the Deep South. Possible record lows, 21 in Dallas, 17 in Birmingham. And when you factor in the wind, it could feel like 20 to 30 below in the Midwest. And if the polling is right, Germany's election on Sunday likely to make Friedrich Merz the chancellor. The critical question, though, whether Merz can actually form a two-party coalition. Even before the rupture in U.S.-European relations, it's bound to be the most consequential election in years, and Bloomberg will have coverage starting live at noon Eastern on Sunday. And as Pope Francis spends day 7 in the hospital for double pneumonia, the Vatican releasing a statement saying his health is improving slightly, that he has no fever, and that his blood tests are stable. The 88-year-old continues to undergo treatment during the day. He received the Eucharist and dedicated himself to some work. Global news 24 hours a day, and whatever you wanted with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg. Tom Paul, Lisa.
Special coverage 12 noon Sunday of the German elections. Paul, I'm going to be blunt. It's not on my Weekend in America radar, but with everything going on, you know, from a Wall Street pro basis, you can't ignore it.
I don't think you can ignore it, Tom. I mean, the economy is just too big, the German economy, and you like to see obviously stability there, like you would with most of our allies. So we'll see how it plays out. But there's a lot of movement there.
The pros go to autos. Like Matt Miller, I'm sure would be really, really good on this. I mean,
yes, having lived there.
We don't understand the auto focus in Germany. I don't think any of us have a grasp on that.
No, but we'll bring the coverage coming out of London on Sunday.
Is Matt Miller with you today, or is he, like...
Emily Graffeo, 2 hours from 10 to 12 with me today. Then Alex will be back next week.
Okay, we're looking forward to this. There's a lot going on here. We got, are we going to get Bitcoin 100,000 again before you and Graffeo
why not?
sign out?
That would be fun.
I think so. I mean,
it's
up
gone.
$1,000.
99,200 on Bitcoin right
Gold down $7. Everybody watching that as well. 2949 in the near future on gold. And the dollar, it's just churning all week as the VIX 15.30 shows that. The VIX, the DXY at a 106. Japan, Jordan Rochester over at Mizuho out with a really smart note today on Japan. And I would suggest over the weekend for global Wall Street, a lot will be written on a reset of view of Japan. Yen has strengthened, and there was a chart today. I'm so sorry, I can't remember who to cite. Ready? Japanese inflation is higher than U.S. inflation.
When was the last time that happened? Yeah.
To the great, wonderful Robbie Feldman at Morgan Stanley. Robbie Feldman in Tokyo, I never thought I would say that. In New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This futures report sponsored by IBKR. Will U.S. CPI exceed 2.4% in March 2025? You can trade your prediction with IBKR Forecast Trader. The yes recently at 60%. Buy yes or no and earn $1 if you're right. You can go to ibkr.com/forecast. We've still got futures mix, and this is following yesterday's losses on Wall Street. Leading the gains right now, that's NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, 72 points. Leading the losses, Dow futures down 0.5%, 236 points. S&P futures, they are little changed. The two-year yield, 4.27%. That's little change. And the yield on the 10-year, 4.49%. And that's down 1 basis point. To commodities, COMEX gold, $2,949 an ounce. We go to oil, $75 a barrel for Brent crude. WTI crude, $71 a barrel. And the Bloomberg dollar spot index up about 0.2%. On the economic calendar for today, we're just a few minutes away from readings from S&P Global on manufacturing and services, as well as that on existing home sales and also consumer sentiment. I want to point out shares of Rivian, they're down 7%. EV deliveries this year, they say they're going to fall short of estimates. And shares of Celsius, the energy drink maker, up 35% right now. It's acquiring its rival for $1.8 billion cash and stock. Alani Nu, haven't heard of it. There you go. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm so out of touch. I thought Celsius was like some AI thing. It's a drink at the Mateo house?
Oh, it's the one that all the kids are having. It's the Celsius
it's the
drink.
Kids,
yeah, they love it.
Like
I went to a hipster bar in Brooklyn last night. Sit down.
Why did I not know that?
Order a Budweiser. No. They have, the only domestic beer they had was a can of Miller High Life. The kids are drinking Miller High Life, Tom.
It's a champagne of bottled beers. It's my mother's favorite.
It's a whole new world.
When we felt rich, we got Miller, and when we were poor, we got Utica Club.
And the kids call it High Life. They call it high life. I'll have a high life.
I'll have a high life?
You have them?
Kathy Hepburn, what in God's name are they talking about here? Lisa, thanks for that. We'll discuss this later when Kathy Hepburn's not here. We're going to go to the market opening here in 4 minutes. Right now, Kathy Hepburn with us with a really earned experience at PGIM Fixed Income. Pro question on a Friday. In a bond portfolio or some form of international equity or bond or EM debt portfolio, is hedging efficacious or is it a fool's errand?
No, I think when you're talking about hedging currency risk, it makes sense, right? Depending on what regime that you're in from the perspective of how strong the dollar is.
Right.
However, right now, there is actually really good returns in yields in some emerging market currencies. So we don't know what's going to happen to the dollar.
Because like completely below the radar, Sing dollar, I just looked at a bunch of currencies. Sing dollar has appreciated 3% since the beginning of the year. Is that good or bad for portfolios?
Well, it depends on, if you look, there are other currencies that have appreciated significantly more since the beginning of the year. And this might be surprising. Some of the emerging market, like true emerging market currencies, like the Brazilian real, like in Colombia, the Colombian peso, even the Mex peso. And you might think at first glance, like, well, that doesn't make any sense. What about what's going to happen with tariffs? What about global trade? However, what makes sense for a portfolio right now is carry and yield. And these are very high yielding currencies, in part because they sold off a lot in the fourth quarter because of uncertainty as it related to tariffs. But as the imposition of tariffs has gotten delayed, investors find that there's value in some of these currencies. That does not necessarily mean that the local bonds have the same value.
I don't know how an emerging market debt investor analyst thinks about what's happening over the last 4 or 5 weeks with all this talk about tariffs. How does that impact your business? Because it seems like it would hit a lot of what you guys look at.
It does, and those are really important top-down considerations. So when we think about the uncertainty as it pertains to growth, as it pertains to tariff, as it pertains to the dollar, that will modulate the overall amount of risk that we want to have on in the portfolio. But that doesn't mean that there aren't really good bottom-up country stories out there because the asset class is so dispersed.
Yep.
There's such dispersion in terms of country credit quality, in terms of vulnerability to what might be happening with different trade linkages, that one of the things that I think is really surprising is so far this year, there are segments of emerging market debt that have outperformed other credit markets. And it's because investors, the common theme is we're still in an environment, the U.S. economy is doing okay, where investors want yields. There's still a lot of money out there. People want carry and yield.
I want to come back to the yield. Kathy Hepworth with us with PGIM. We're going to get the markets open, then come back to Ms. Hepworth here in a moment. Red and green on the screen. UNH down 10% at one point here. Dow futures down 245, make it 0.6%. NASDAQ goes the other way, slightly green. Small stocks do better today. I haven't even mentioned it. We've been so twisted here today. The 10-year real yield, 2.02%. To get the 10-year to pop under 2% would be a big deal. We're not there yet on the 10-year real yield. What is real as the market is opening? Lisa Mateo.
And let's see how we kick things off, because it's been a pretty volatile week on Wall Street. Right now, we'll start with the S&P 500. That is little change, down about 4.6,113. We have the Dow down 0.6%, 276 points, 43,898. And finally, the NASDAQ just kicking in. Well, it's up about 0.2%, 48 points, 20,008. We go to the 2-year yield, 4.26%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.49%, and that's down 1 basis point. We have COMEX gold lower, $2,947 an ounce. We have Brent crude lower as well, down more than 1%, $75 a barrel. WTI crude, $71 a barrel. The Bloomberg dollar spot index up 0.1%. Want to check in with the Japanese yen, down 0.4%, 150.25 against the dollar, and the euro down 0.2%, 104.76 against the dollar. At the open, also United Health down 10%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much. Greatly appreciate that, Lisa. I look at like PGIM Emerging Market Total Return Bond Fund. I have no clue what this is, other than its borderline upper decile performance. The 1-year and 3-year performance is basically lights out. What kind of coupon does some kind of portfolio like that get? I think a lot of Americans are ignorant. It's not 5.2%, is it?
No, it's in that instance, and for that fund, it's significantly above that. Like you could be low double-digit type of returns. And the reason is that's a best idea fund. Last year, right? So we're looking at the historical returns. Last year, there are segments of emerging market debt that performed 40%, that returned 40%. There are other ones that were just along with the market. So that gets back to that whole issue of dispersion, right? You have single A rated credits, double A rated credits, and then you have credits in default that were restructuring stories last year. There might be less of that this year, but there are still lots of mispriced assets, right? So it's not just sovereign debt, it's quasi-sovereign debt, it's corporate debt. It's those currencies, that the really high carry on some of those currencies that I referred to earlier. And it's to a lesser extent right now, it's returns on local bonds in emerging markets.
Interesting. How about China? You know, a lot of folks said when the government cracked down on China tech companies years ago, China was absolutely uninvestable, even though it's such a big part of the MSCI index. Now it looks like Xi is coming back maybe and, you know, trying to reapproach with some of these leaders. I'm not sure how real it is. How do you guys think about China?
I think, you know, China is a big part of some indices, clearly the equity indices. It's a smaller part of some of the debt indices. But we have to, we care about China. We want to understand what's happening with China because it's such a big part of the rest of the world.
Yep.
So in terms of credit, it's very tight. The spreads in China issuers, be it sovereign or SOEs, they're very tight. So there's not a lot of value there, but they hold up really well. When it comes to the local bonds in China, there's some value there because it's one of the few central banks that are cutting rates.
Thank you so much for coming in. Kathy,
Thank you.
with us. Really appreciate it with PJ. We got to keep sure. Come in for a longer time next time. We got to. Yeah, did you say double? What's the yield on an EM debt portfolio?
So
7%?
No, it's higher than that. The index yield is 7.7%, but the yield on a portfolio, if you have a mix of different assets in there, can be closer to 8 or 9.
Tom, Kathy, back in her day, you know where she worked back early in her career? Bankers Trust.
I saw that.
I think pound for pound, the smartest people I ever worked with and competed against were at Bankers Trust back in the day.
They were.
I mean, derivatives. I mean, they created, in my mind, they created derivatives.
They invented a lot of the.
Tried to explain derivatives to me once.
Yeah, the math.
Eyes glazed over.
We go to surveillance energy drink reporter Lisa Mateo here, because I can't decide between the sparkling wild berry functional essential energy drink, Celsius. Do you have this stuff at home?
Well, no, I don't allow my kids to
I don't
drink
either.
it. But apparently it doesn't have as much sugar as the other ones. So, but that's why the kids love it. It's like the hot thing, and people at the gym, that's all they have is their Celsius next time. They don't even drink water anymore.
There's sparkling blue crush.
Yes.
It's a performance energy drink. Remember Gatorade?
Sure.
It was like, you know.
Yeah, that's so yesterday.
And Celsius is up 30%, 30.
Yeah.
Again, Tom, at the hipster bar in Brooklyn last night, I looked around the bar. I didn't recognize one beverage in front of these kids. I didn't know what they were drinking.
If I'd been there, I'd have had a martini. They probably don't know how to make one. I don't know. Paul Sweeney in Brooklyn.
Yeah,
I haven't been in Brooklyn since they built the bridge. Maybe this weekend. It's Bloomberg's Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. With the Dow leading the losses on Wall Street, down 0.6%, 279 points. The S&P 500 down 0.2%, 11 points. NASDAQ is little change. Now, taking a closer look using the IMAP feature of your terminal, the 11 major industry groups, you can tell the biggest drag coming from, you click through and it goes to United Health. Their shares down 8%. What that's doing is dragging others like Humana right behind it. That's down about 0.1%. Then you go to where the biggest pull coming from. Well, you go communication services, media entertainment, interactive media. At the top is Meta. And those shares, they're up about 0.8%. Meta actually leading the Mag 7 right now. To the 2-year yield, 4.26%. That's little change. And the yield on the 10-year, 4.49%. And that's down 1 basis point. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.1%. Also wanted to point out shares of Booking Holding. That's a parent company to travel brands like Kayak, Priceline, if you use those. Posted a strong quarter. Its shares up now more than 1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Lots going on here right now with the Dow negative 300 off the UNH news. NASDAQ does much better, almost flat. Slightly red. Jamie Patton with us now with TCW, Trust Company of the West, co-head of global rates. Jamie, as a firm, as Paul mentions, the excellence of TCW, are you managing for coupon or could you look out for total return?
It depends on the style is the short answer, but we're always looking at total return. And some of our styles, we look more at income, that's coupon, but generally speaking, we're just trying to figure out how we can create the most alpha for our
Where's
clients.
the alpha right now, given the turmoil out there?
Well, what strikes us today is that headline volatility, policy volatility, generally the unknowns in the economy and the administration and the geopolitical world, they're all creating such significant uncertainty, yet you've actually never been paid less to take risk. Implied rate volatility is at or near its lows. Risk assets are at or near their highs. Credit spreads are at or near their tights. Even the volatility of spreads has collapsed. And macro markets are becoming totally numb to all these tariff headlines. So, we get these tape bombs and markets are reacting less and less and less to that. So the room for error in putting on risk right now is about as narrow as we've ever seen it. So one of our favorite trades is actually not taking credit risk.
So, okay, so if you've never been paid less to take risk, so do I just sit my 2-year treasury at 4.25% and I can go home now?
We actually do like 2-year treasuries around here, 4.25, 4.30. It's interesting because the last time yields were at these levels, you had to give up over 5% on your cash to buy them. But now it's kind of like a wash, whether you're in cash or that. And owning 2-year treasuries, you have a lot of upside. If the Fed does have to cut rates, now the market is pretty benign pricing. The Fed will be on hold for quite some time. The other place that we like to put some money right now is in other global DM markets like the UK. So if you just look purely at the numbers, the US and the UK look weirdly similar. Policy rates have been taking a nearly identical path. 2-year yields in the UK and the US are pretty similar. Both markets have just a couple central bank policy cuts priced in. But in the UK, we're seeing sticky inflation and weaker growth. Higher yields in the US can be attributed to the fatter right tail risks. The same can't be said for the UK.
Correlate, Jamie, the 10-year real yield. All of a sudden, handled 2.0 out to 2.20. I'm now down to 2.02. What is the significance of the full faith and credit 10-year real yield finally breaching and staying beneath 2%?
We think those are attractive levels. So I'll back up for a second. Our base case post-Trump administration and all of these different changes, our base case has really not changed, which is monetary policy will continue to be the big driver for rates in the economy. The Fed will have to come eventually back down to approximately neutral, which their own definition is 3%. But what we see is that both right and left tail risks are much more likely now. There's a higher probability to both of them. So the right tail risk, U.S. exceptionalism, higher growth, a lot of this feels like the market's base case, even though it's our right tail risk. And that's where real yields are interesting because what we've been doing at TCW is swapping some of our nominal duration for real duration, protecting against inflation spikes or just a Fed that's higher for longer because inflation's sticky. The left tail side, that's a little bit easier for us because we're already positioned for that. And our base case just does better if there's a bigger than expected adjustment in the business cycle.
So, Jamie, given that background, what's our Fed to do? The work function's telling me only 38 basis points of cuts this year. Is that it?
The work page, I think, is telling you a weighted average probability. So according to the options market, the markets have priced in around a 15 to 20% chance that the Fed could actually hike again. That is certainly not our base case or even a probable tail risk to us. Right. But the market pricing, that's a chance. And then, of course, there's also the chance that the Fed's going to have to cut all the way back down to neutral or 3%. So I think that 38 basis points, it's not that the market really thinks the Fed is going to cut 1.5 more times this year. It's trying to show you a bigger picture of what if inflation spikes and what if we do have a more normal business cycle.
Jamie, got to run on breaking news. Don't be a stranger. If you're in New York, show up. We'll do it forever. Jamie Patton with us with Trust Company of the West, TCW. There is breaking news before John Tucker in the news, and that is yen getting back to where it was at midnight. It has breached 150. Wow. Stronger Japanese yen, 149.81. I agree with Jordan. I'm going to editorialize here. I agree with Jordan Rochester at Mizuho. This is a huge deal. We'll go over 22 reasons why the Japanese yen could stay stronger. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, guys, Israel's prime minister this morning promising revenge after officials in Israel say one of the 4 bodies handed over by Hamas was not that of Shuri Bibas. Israeli officials say they don't know whose remains they are. In a statement, the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, says the cruelty of Hamas knows no bounds. Hamas says her remains were mixed with other victims buried in the rubble of a building. Senate lawmakers voting well into the night and into this morning over a series of budget amendments. The Republicans are trying to advance the first part of a budget bill that Democrats say will give tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans. Senate Minority Leader, Democrat Chuck Schumer.
This debate is going to go on for weeks and maybe months. Democrats will be ready to come back and do this over and over again because Americans deserve to know the truth. And what is the truth? Under Donald Trump's Republican Party, billionaires win and American families lose.
Well, the Senate was able to pass a version of a resolution early today. Thousands of government workers the target of President Trump's job cuts. The administration insists they're firing people for cause, but a lot of those fired workers have only been on the job for less than 2 years. They say that's all news to them. Nicholas Berardi works for the IRS in Philadelphia.
It even says here in the email that they're citing the reason why I'm fired is because of my performance. But until today, I hadn't gotten a performance review.
Well, the president's top economic advisor insists the thousands of workers who've been fired deserved to go. As Pope Francis spends day 7 in the hospital for double pneumonia, the Vatican releasing a statement today saying his health is improving slightly, that he has no fever, and that his blood tests are stable. The 88-year-old pontiff continues to undergo treatment during the day. Dozens of major news organizations, including some conservative outlets, are urging the Trump administration to stop blocking the Associated Press from press events. The White House has said it's blocking reporters from the news service because the outlet refers to the Gulf of Mexico in its articles rather than the Gulf of America, as decreed by President Trump. In a letter to the White House, the news organizations say the First Amendment prohibits the government from asserting control over how news organizations make editorial decisions. Global news, 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg. Tom Paul, Lisa.
You heard his thumb. He was pretty darn good out of Texas as a ball player. His major league average coming up from the Syracuse Cyclones is .215. So he's like hanging on. Mm-hmm. And he's with the New York Mets. And a guy showed up, not with a beard, named Juan Soto.
Yeah.
And the kid did what you do. You give the star your number.
Right.
He bought him a car.
Yeah, it comes. You see that, if somebody's got the number, and somebody comes up and wants it, you gotta pay for it a little bit. Show a little sign of thank you.
It does more
new
than
car.
I'm sure they got 8 the Mets have 20 psychiatrists, but the Red Sox have 1.
Juan Soto's getting paid $762 million, I think, is his contract, so he can afford it.
You probably go and hedge the transaction for him.
Exactly.
We'll have to see. Very cool. Just very
Spring
good.
training.
Brett Batty, I believe, is his name.
We're getting some spring training
Thank
games
you.
this weekend. We're going to get some Mets
Austin,
on TV.
Texas,
Yeah.
Lake Travis High School, with the Brooklyn Cyclones, I should say. That's it. Very cool. Number 22, Juan Soto. Bloomberg surveillance.
You're listening to Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, and you knew that voice when you heard it. The star of afternoons. She doesn't get up before 10 a.m. It takes a real treat. 9:54 a.m. Carol
I've been
Masser.
listening to you guys all morning.
We're up to 42
Kaplan,
listeners. We're rocking.
Gurman,
Gurman was lights out. And he
know.
mentioned what you and I are looking at, which is the imports of China. Paul and I mentioned this with Jeff DeGraff of Renaissance.
Yeah.
Carol Masser, this is a sea change week for our interpretation of Beijing and China.
Totally. I mean, look at President Xi, who for so long was really tough on all of the tech companies, the big tech companies and the executives. I mean, Jack Ma, right? Alibaba. But I've been watching it. The guys in the afternoon kind of make fun of me because I am obsessed with the NASDAQ Golden Dragon China Index. But you look at it, it's up 16% year to date, up 45% since August 28th, easily outpacing what's going on in the U.S. And mind you, it was a beaten up market, but nonetheless, you can't ignore what they are doing.
And it's interesting, Carol, because a lot of investors felt like they were into Alibaba, Tencent, all those big names, and then when the tech crackdown came from President Xi several years ago, it almost became like China was uninvestable.
Absolutely.
And now it looks like President Xi is trying to change the narrative here. And again, Alibaba's up 60% year to date. So maybe investors are coming back in.
Up another 6% today.
Yeah.
I mean, it's up, as you said, 60% year to date. I mean, so it's just kind of wild. And I think it's the rethink. You're right. Like, I think it was, okay, if the government's going to have its hands, Chinese government, and all of those companies, you don't know what the rules are anymore. And it sounds like now we know once again what the rules are.
You got to get a
Tom, what are you doing over there?
I'm just looking at, you got to get in. She's only here to get interview ideas.
Sure.
Are you kidding? I take notes.
Okay.
Like,
oh boy.
Hey guys, did you hear surveillance? Guess who
queen
we're
of
going to
notes.
have on?
You
Mark
got to
Gurman.
do Eva Dow of the Washington Post, DOU, out of Missouri, and just, with the Journal for years and now at the Washington Post on Huawei. Because I think Huawei to us is, wait, their CFO's in Vancouver, she's going to jail. But of course, it's much more than that. And it's on my book pile at home. I got like 10 book pile.
I know those piles.
Vet built shoes on the bottom books, which I never get to. But I mean, this whole Huawei Alibaba thing, we've forgotten about for like 3 or 4 years.
Absolutely. And I thought it was interesting, too, what Mark had to say today about Apple. So entrenched in terms of their global supply chain in China, but also looking elsewhere, but not necessarily going to remove itself completely. And I just think, I'm curious about the Chinese economy going forward.
Yeah, and Huawei's come out, and if you think about Apple and China, one of the challenges they're facing is Huawei's actually out with a really good competitive phone there. So it's a lot of challenges for Apple in China. And as Mark Gurman said, it took them 30 years to build up this global supply chain. How long is it going to take them to switch it?
I remember being in India, World Economic Forum, and doing a panel, and it was about supply chains, and it was really about Apple and how incredible it was. You could buy a phone and then track it coming. What?
We don't really care. The reason you're here, we've done this with Lisa Mateo all morning.
Are we going to talk about beard stubble?
No.
I like a little bit.
I got a little bit going. Carol Massar, do you allow Celsius into the house?
No.
Okay, then why
soda into the house?
Not really. I will say my husband does like zero, what is it, the zero sugar stuff. He likes, we drink a lot of water. My daughter too. I mean, we were rough parents. Like apple juice and water and milk.
That's why we have this connection.
I know. It's amazing. Does vermouth count as a soda?
No, red wine is also one of those things definitely allowed in the house. Absolutely.
Is Celsius up 30% today?
Yes, it was.
What is it?
The energy drink. It's buying another one of its rivals.
Yeah, it's just that stuff that makes your like blood go crazy and you have like jitters. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that because probably a lot of people like it.
Thank you for Thank you for coming in this early in the morning. Usually, like 11:30.
Bloomberg that's me. 2 p.m. Tim Stenovic, Carol Massar.
Yeah, they're
right through 5 o'clock. They get to deal with all the breaking earnings after the close every day. They have to do it like right on the fly.
It's like a real job.
Yeah.
And they get to drink wine.
Actually, can I just say we're kind of the executive order show?
The what?
Executive orders or
yes,
executive action
that's right, because the executive order signings are okay. Very good. Cover that.
Have a good weekend.
For Carol, with her well-behaved household, there's only one song to play to get to the weekend. Carol Massar, she was too young to remember Loverboy.
No, I wasn't.